All right, I started the timer. I think we should be live on YouTube.
All right. Let me refresh my subscription feed. All right, I do see it live. Okay. I just see the, I guess you got to put up the slide with the countdown. Yeah, for YouTube, I just see your name on a big black
Let
screen.
me share
Okay, we have
my.
to link this.
Okay, are you able to see the countdown timer now?
Oh yes, yep. Cool. I will share the YouTube link with everyone. Okay.
All right, let me make that post on LinkedIn and I should be good on my end.
Okay, so I think I wrote a new post with the YouTube link. Yeah, and then I updated all the things out of YouTube. 33 on YouTube. Hello, lovely folks of YouTube. It's great to see you guys. Yeah, as you can see from the countdown timer, we have, I think, yeah, 7 minutes before we start. I think we'll probably start a little bit earlier because try to get the ball rolling around 9 a.m. PST. Like the event said, it's about 8:56 PST. So maybe 4 or 5 minutes, we'll start going into the content. But yeah, sit tight. We have a lot of logistical stuff to run through with these sessions. There's a ton of stuff we have to do. Like we have to, make sure we communicate in like Slack, LinkedIn, and YouTube, all the proper links. And this is a thing that happens quite a lot with the bigger events. We have to deal with spam. So on the LinkedIn event itself, a lot of people will share fake links to the session. Oh yeah, there's one just now. And then I don't think there's a way for the event creators to kind of block them automatically and like restrict the feed to kind of trusted people. So Rahul and I just delete them manually, which kind of sucks, but it works. If one of you out there is a LinkedIn event guru and know how to restrict the feed to kind of save us this manual work, please let us know. But yeah, it's when we do these really big sessions on Saturday, we always got to look out for these spammers because we always get so many of them. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. And then Alex, I'm thinking, should we go ahead and let people in on the Zoom call?
Oh yeah, that's YouTube folks are already here now.
Let's do it.
How many folks do we have on Zoom? Oh, 214. Okay, that's pretty crazy. Yeah, and another thing is, it's it's not reasonable to expect everyone to show up on time, and we're also a bit early. We're like 2 minutes early officially. So there's the kind of the time between when the meeting starts and then like 3 or 4 minutes afterwards. A ton of people pour in during that time. So Rahul and I like to wait before all those folks come in before we like really get the ball rolling. But yeah, all right. So we have,
Yeah, welcome
okay,
everyone.
we can disable the waiting room now, but I think we have probably almost 300 people total now. And hello. It's crazy how many folks are here.
All right, hey everyone. I'm gonna actually, as you stream in, I'll actually disable the waiting room. Sorry, I'll
Yeah.
disable the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Because that'll
Should
get
do
super
that.
noisy. And then we'll actually open it up at the end.
Yeah, I have a bagel sandwich. I'm gonna try to like really quickly eat before we start.
You have like 1 minute.
Yep. Mm.
And then how's my audio quality, Alex? Did I
Sounds pretty good to
I'm-
me.
I've had an issue in these past couple sessions where I feel like I had an external mic hooked up, but it wasn't actually being used as my microphone input. So I just want to make sure. I think I'm just double checking now that it is being used as good, and then I want to make sure that you're hearing me okay. So as Alex finishes up his bagel over there, if you're here for talking about how to create a better tech resume, a stellar tech resume that will actually get you more job opportunities, then you're in the right place. Alex and I will kind of talk about some of the meta points about why we think this session is important. We'll give some logistics and we'll get into it in just a minute or two. But welcome everyone. Happy Saturday. Saturday morning if you're in California. I'm in Chicago right now, the wonderful city of Chicago. It's about 11 a.m. here. And then, if you're on the other side of the world, it is Saturday evening. So wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in, welcome. One other thing I'll do is if you're on Zoom, then I'm going to launch a poll. So you should be able to take this, you should be able to see this poll pop up. It has 3 questions. Just take a minute to answer those as we wait. Basically, we're just trying to figure out, demographics of where people are coming from, along with, like what kind of device are you calling in from? That'll become relevant at the end of the session. Alex and I are actually going to share something with all of you. And then I dropped some links. Don't worry too much about reading these. We'll walk through what these links mean, just in case if you're looking for something to do, or if you want to check out the community as we wait for this last minute, as people stream in, just check out the links that I just dropped, and we'll talk about those.
And if you're on YouTube, those exact links that Rahul dropped are in the description of the live stream video.
Yeah. All right, let's do one more check to see that there are no spammers on the LinkedIn event. Let me refresh the page over here.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy, right? Because like back in the day, we had like 20 people attend these events back in January, February. And it's kind of crazy that we have like 5,000 people marked as attending on LinkedIn. And, we have at least 500 or 600 people who are live right now. So it's a blessing, but also it means that you have to deal with these spammers.
Oh, we got one.
Yeah, we got one. Are you taking care of it, Alex?
Let's eat Barker. Yeah, I got it.
Should start like shaming these people who, I don't know if that's actually an effective tactic to deal with spammers, but.
Yeah, I think she's probably posted once every 2-3 minutes now. Makes me feel like it's a bot, but I don't know if, I mean, LinkedIn should have this prevention against automated spam like this.
Yeah. If anyone have a contact at LinkedIn, please do make an intro. We need to figure out how to get these people like blocked, or I don't know if there's like a mechanism in LinkedIn events that we just don't know about.
As a heads up to the YouTube folks, I dropped a link to the Zoom session. I saw someone in the chat mention that there's currently about 70 spots left in Zoom. So if you want to join us on Zoom to participate in polls and ask us questions and stuff, then yeah, just use that link.
Yeah, why don't we-
while supplies last.
Yeah, why don't we use that as a segue to kind of get into it? So basically, like, let me explain the context here, and then we can dive into like our intros and how this session will work and how we're going to break down the time. But
Yeah,
real
we
quick
can
on,
probably turn on our video now and just switch off.
oh
this
yeah, good call.
slide. Yeah.
All right, we've never done this before. We are going to turn on our video. Let's see if people can see me. Actually, I'm curious how it'll look on the YouTube live stream
Yeah.
with, yeah, like will it show picture in picture or what? I'm not sure. But okay, hello everyone. How's it going? But the context here is that we used to only have Zoom because we were pretty small. We had like 30, 40 people attend. But then we got to the point where we were too big. And so we purchased an add-on on Zoom. But even then, we are going to almost certainly hit 500 people on Zoom, which is what we paid for as our like limit of number of participants. Like Zoom, it doesn't support an infinite number of people, obviously. So that's why we also started live streaming to YouTube. And that will basically allow us to, scale infinitely. So that's the kind of context of why we are managing the logistical headache a little bit of, Zoom and YouTube, and why we're going to be addressing both audiences. The only difference is that on Zoom, you'll have the ability to kind of ask us questions at the end. And we have things like the poll that we just launched. But if you're on YouTube, don't worry, you'll be able to hear everything, and we'll kind of make sure that we walk through things as they come up.
Yep. And just as a heads up, I think on the YouTube, it doesn't, oh yeah, it does show our faces. So that works out.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So how about we kind of, I think since for context, these Saturday sessions and Saturday morning for us in the United States tend to be our biggest ones because it's the most flexible time zone. So I think let's kind of spend a little bit of extra time on the intro, since I think a lot of folks here are new. So how about Rahul, like we can introduce ourselves and then talk about the community and then talk about all the awesome links you've shared, and I can probably show them again. That sound good?
That sounds perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start. So yeah, hey everyone. My name is Alex. I am currently an Android engineer at Robinhood. Still relatively new to Robinhood. I've been here for just about 5 months now. Before Robinhood, I was at Facebook for 4 years. At Facebook, I started off working on Portal, the video calling device that we shipped at Facebook like 3.5 years ago or so. That's actually where I met Rahul. He joined the company a few months after I did. After 1 year at Portal, I went to Instagram. So I worked on Instagram for 3 years, working on the ad side actually. So trying to bring in the dollars so Facebook stock could stay high. And then before my 4 years at Facebook, I was at Course Hero for 2 years. I was their first Android engineer and lead. I built their Android app from scratch. Super fun. And before Course Hero, I was at PayPal as a full stack engineer for 1 year, mainly working on backend stuff, like Java backend stuff, like kind of Maven, Spring, that kind of stuff. And then before that, I was at UCLA, where I got my bachelor's in computer science. I was there for 4 years. And yeah, that's kind of my whole software story. Yeah, Rahul, what about you?
Yeah, all right. So Alex goes, from present day backward, and I usually like to go the other way around. So I'll start with college. I went to Stanford. So I've been in, so I've been living in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley for quite a while now. And then after Stanford, I was a founding engineer at a company. It's actually founded by a professor of mine at Stanford. So that's an interesting story that at some point I'll share with all of you. But that got acquired by Pinterest very quickly, like a true Silicon Valley story. I was at Pinterest for about 3 years, where I did a ton of interviewing, a lot of resume review. And then I made my way over to Facebook, joined Portal, which is where I met Alex. And then I have been doing Android and full stack development at Facebook for about 4 years now. And that's also during my time at Facebook is when I started teaching a lot more about Android. So I teach a class at Stanford about Android development. And I love doing sessions like these where we just talk about a topic that we don't think is actually being addressed sufficiently in a lot of the content out there. And we just try and teach people what we know, our opinions about things that have been going on. So that is my background. What we'll do now is I'm going to drop the links and we'll kind of walk through the links. I think those are super important as a way for each of you to get connected into the community. The model that we have here is that we're going to deliver hopefully a ton of value to you in the next hour or hour and a half about how can you create a better resume really applicable tactical things that you can apply right now to make a better resume, and you'll walk away with that. But the idea is that beyond just the immediate utility that you get, we really want you to give us feedback. Tell us what else you want to see. Like, this whole community is designed around helping you advance your career in tech faster or get into tech in the first place. And so, getting involved on LinkedIn or Slack or just messaging us directly, we're always open to it. And that's really what makes this community so special for us. So
Yeah.
Alex, do you want to walk through those?
For sure. I love doing this. And yeah, for the kind of folks who've like been with us before, please bear with us. I mentioned before, these sessions are bigger, so there's a lot of new folks. So we're going to take a bit of extra time with this. But
yeah, actually, if you're on the Zoom, right? If this is your first ever session, can you give me a thumbs up? Like, there's a reaction feature on Zoom. If this is your first time coming to Alex and Rahul's, these Zoom live sessions, give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, while you guys are figuring out your thumbs, I will kind of go through like kind of the context behind the community and like all these links and how it works. So kind of the story behind this community was, there's this kind of global pandemic that I'm sure everyone knows about. And this was back in, I think, January, December of this year, so like 8 months ago. And it kind of, Rahul and I were, I think a lot of folks are kind of reevaluating like what we wanted to do with our lives, right? Because I think, it really makes you put your life in a different perspective when there's a global pandemic kind of raging right outside your door. So it just naturally seemed like a good time to like, hey, this is a great time to help people. There's a lot of suffering right now. And I think we can do a small part to kind of help out with that. And we wanted to stick with what we know, which is like, we're pretty good at this software kind of Silicon Valley thing. So we wanted to help out, our fellow engineers, other folks in the engineering community. And how we settled on this format is we actually saw a gap in kind of the content pool. So I think when it comes to viewing helpful content, I see kind of two categories. Number one, there's just kind of broad influencer style content, like these kind of really shallow like LinkedIn posts or like YouTube videos. Generally very accessible for a broad audience, but I think a lot of the times the advice is either too obvious or oversimplified or doesn't really cover a lot of the nuance. Frankly, a lot of it's low quality. And for these kind of like creators and advice, the relationship is very unidirectional. So, the creator creates content and you consume it. But if you want to interact with the creator, then, that's good luck. They're not going to respond to you. Like, let's say, you're commenting on like a tech YouTuber with like 500,000 subscribers. You comment on a video, the chances of them responding to you is like pretty much zero, right? Like, you can write the comment, but in terms of getting interaction back, it's probably not going to happen. So that's kind of the first kind of pool of content. The second pool of content is kind of more personalized stuff. Like, I've seen other folks from kind of tech companies, strong tech companies like Facebook, like where Rahul works on, where I used to work. They give advice, but and it's high quality advice, but it's in a one-on-one. It's actually in a one-on-one setting, and it's actually extremely expensive. So I know a couple folks from like Facebook, Google, et cetera. They're like either selling like interview prep services or like career coaching, but it's literally like $300 an hour or $500 an hour. So it's crazy expensive. So this is like high quality content, but very expensive and like kind of quite narrow because one-on-one setting. So Rahul and I, we kind of saw gaps. Like, what if we made something that was broad, but also extremely high quality and most importantly free? And that's kind of what these sessions are. It's not like the extremely kind of broad content, and because we do this live, and this lets us to be really like kind of honest with folks. And these sessions are quite long because we have a lot to say, because we really want to go in depth on a topic. We want to pay a lot of respect to the topic. And I think that has led to a lot of success, kind of building this new format. The feedback has been good. We have like 500 to 1,000 people show up for these sessions now. And people have consistently told us like, hey, this has helped me a lot. I haven't really been able to find this kind of advice anywhere else on the internet. Thank you so much. And so that's kind of the story behind the community, why we created it, and the value we're like to provide. In terms of how it works, we shared a bunch of links in the Zoom chat just now. Again, if you're on the YouTube, it's in the description of the YouTube video. First two links are links to the personal LinkedIns. As kind of hinted at before, is that we want this relationship to be more interactive and bi-directional. So like, we want to kind of create content and give advice to you guys, but we actually want to talk to you guys as well. Which is, even though we're at a point where we have thousands of people in the community, Rahul and I more or less respond to every LinkedIn and Slack message, every personal message that we get, we respond to it. And we make the Zoom session in particular very interactive. We have all these polls and we take your questions at the end. We love interacting with the community. We don't just want to just kind of like rain down content from ivory tower. Like we actually want to talk with you guys. So kind of to represent that, we would love to connect with you folks personally on LinkedIn. Next link is, I think, a pretty simple one. We do these sessions. Fortunately, we can't do them as much anymore because it's getting really, really busy for us. The next one is, the next session is in October. We really try to find a time in September, but it's just, we got a lot of stuff going on. But anyways, the next session is in October. It's about an interesting one, how to build quality products with like hundreds of thousands of users from scratch and for free. So yeah, if you're a tinkerer, or even if you're just looking for your first job and you need like a good project to back up your resume, you join us at that next session. After that, we have kind of 3 different links that I want to, that are really important, especially the first one of these 3, which is the Slack community. So for folks who have never used Slack before, it is a professional instant messaging community, emphasis on the instant. Slack is essentially Rahul and I's way of helping you the most directly because it's instant. You can go on Slack and you can just ask us your question or ask one of the many channels with hundreds of amazing engineers a question, and you'll get an answer almost all the time within 24 hours. And I think that's really magical to me. Is I've answered like thousands upon thousands of messages on Slack. This is, I think, our way of like really, really providing the best support and kind of scaling it more. Like these sessions are great. Tons of people come, but we can only hold them once every couple of weeks, maybe once a month. So, and we don't want to like wait a month to help you. And we can only talk about one topic during these sessions, right? But on Slack, you can ask us anything and we'll help you like pretty much immediately. So yeah, please join us on Slack. If you're not on the Slack, my question is, why not? What are you doing? You should totally be on Slack with us. And after that, we have the LinkedIn community, which is, I think a lot of folks discovered us through LinkedIn. LinkedIn events are kind of the main way for us to coordinate these sessions. So yeah, from a very tactical perspective, if you want to like know the upcoming events and the details around them and whatnot, yeah, please join us in the LinkedIn community. LinkedIn is where like pretty much all the relevant professional networking stuff happens nowadays. It's pretty crazy how LinkedIn has grown. That's something that really surprised Rahul and I. And I think LinkedIn, so Slack, we can go in depth because it's, we can write as long a message as we want, but on LinkedIn, there's like post character length limit. So we'll share resources on LinkedIn, but it's more kind of short and easy to consume than it's the stuff we write on Slack. So if you want to just kind of get kind of good advice quickly, then LinkedIn's good for that. And lastly, we have the mailing list, which is kind of, I guess, the black sheep at this point. I think for most people, Slack and LinkedIn are enough. But yeah, if you don't really like Slack or LinkedIn that much, yeah, join us through email. We send an email every few weeks with all the updates about the community. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's just kind of go to learn.rkapande.com and then just kind of put in your email and you can sign up for a mailing list. And yeah, lastly, we have Rahul's YouTube, which is only really relevant for folks in the Zoom call. Yeah, his YouTube channel makes a lot of awesome kind of tech content, focus on Android. This session is also being co-broadcast to YouTube, so that's pretty awesome. Yeah, Rahul, anything to add?
That's perfect. I think that, I know we're like 17 minutes in, but I just feel like these links and the way they get plugged in the community is so important. So please do check it out. Like the YouTube thing in particular, like I want to connect that back to what we're doing. Like the reason I got started making Android tutorials on YouTube, at least one reason, was because I really felt like the existing Android content out there wasn't good. Like I knew I could do better. I could explain things better. I could provide better explanations. I could, tell people about some of the patterns beyond just like writing the code. And I felt like a similar thing is applying for Alex and I. Like we looked at what else is out there and we looked at either the pricing of the existing advice or some of the wrong advice or bad advice that was given. And we just said, okay, we know we can do better. We want this information to be free and accessible to everyone. So let's start this community. So whatever way you choose, please do get in touch. What I'll do now is I'm going to end the poll on Zoom. We had 528 people participate. So that's amazing. Let me just like quickly walk through this. Majority of people are, dialing in from a laptop, which makes sense. I think Zoom is kind of more laptop friendly. The majority of people heard about our community through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is like pretty powerful as a way to reach people. And then, it seems like the majority of people are coming from the US or Canada, and then a good number of people from India. So wherever you are, hello. Okay, with that, why don't we get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it. We can turn off our video so we can focus on the content now.
Yeah. I make weird faces when I'm thinking, so I'm going to turn off video now.
Now we should turn on video. It's entertainment. But I'm just kidding. Anyway, let's go.
Okay, so the way that it'll work is we'll have like maybe an hour or 45 minutes worth of content, and then after that, we're going to open up to Q&A, and we'll talk about how Q&A will work at the end. But for now, we really want to talk about what we're all here for, which is how can we create a better resume. And so to start this off, let's actually do some meta conversation about why is it even important to have a resume, and what are the things that we need to consider when we think about an effective tech resume. And I think the biggest thing that people forget is that who is the audience for your resume? The audience is going to be a recruiter, and there are a ton of consequences that come from a recruiter reading it. The primary one being that they are almost certainly going to be non-technical. And so rather than going in depth about, we'll talk more about this later, but rather than going in depth about the nuances of the technology, you really need to be very precise about high level, what your impact was, and making that statement accessible to anyone, technical or non-technical. And the other thing, and this is something that really shocked me when I first learned about it, is that the people who read your resumes, especially at these big companies like Microsoft, Google, Airbnb, whatever, they are going to spend very, very little time on your resume. On average, one article I read said 7.4 seconds. And so that means that you can't have anything which is extraneous or anything which is going to distract from people getting the main signal out of your resume within 7 seconds. You don't have that much time to really capture the attention of the person reading the resume and tell them why you're a good fit for the job. And so the consequence of this is that you have to really stand out as when you submit your resume. Like having a really polished and professional resume is one of the most high leverage activities you can do as an engineer, because it'll be your entry point into getting pretty much any job in your career, especially if you're starting out. And Alex, do you want to talk about the basic proficiency isn't enough?
Yeah. So I think a lot of folks in our community are on the more junior side. I'm sure they're very familiar with this, is that it's particularly brutal being a more junior engineer in the market right now. I define junior as like kind of 2 years of experience or less. And that's because the supply of junior engineering jobs and entry-level jobs is not that high. It's especially when compared to the supply of engineers, new engineers who are hunting for those jobs. And the reason that the supply of new junior engineers is so gargantuan is because tech is more accessible than ever. Like there's all these amazing resources for you to learn React, machine learning, Node, whatever you want. You can follow some tutorial on YouTube or Udemy or whatever and build a basic kind of applet or service with these tech stacks in 3 to 6 months, even if you have no experience coding. So if you're applying for like a React web developer position, for example, as a junior, React developer, and you have a couple kind of basic websites you got working with React, and you're applying for this position at a pretty decent company, either maybe it's like a known startup or it's like a kind of established bigger company, you're going to have like 100 people with the exact same credentials as you applying for that job. So the question is like, how do you stand out? The basic proficiency you have, the basic proficiency that you currently have, like a ton of people also have it, right? But the recruiter of these 100 people can only choose like 5 or 10 people to get a phone screen, maybe 20, right? So how do you essentially stand out relative to like 80-90% of applicants? And that's really tricky. That's what we're going to go into in this session. And then, as kind of Rahul mentioned before about the recruiter, when I look at these sessions, we give a lot of very concrete individual advice. We're going to give you like very specific advice on how to format your resume. But I see those kind of actions and advice as giving you fish, like giving something that's very direct that you can do. But as we all know, like teaching how to fish is much more kind of sustainable, important than just getting individual fish. And I think the high level concept that, you know, all the advice kind of flows from, like the high level concept I want everyone here to remember is this recruiter bit. And because writing a good resume is inherently an exercise in empathy and being able to take on someone else's perspective. I think the most common flaw I see with a lot of resumes is they're assuming another engineer is reading them. They're assuming another engineer similar to them is reading them. So they'll have like all these very kind of, you know, very ultra specific tech stacks. They're only going to have GitHub links on their profile. They're going to mention a lot of things at their company that are like very niche, like very like kind of like acronyms or like keywords that the average recruiter is just not going to understand. Right. So I think once you kind of really put yourselves in the shoes of a recruiter when you're writing your resume, it's going to completely change the way you write your resume. And all the advice that we give here today is it's going to stem from that kind of core mentality. Right. And as we mentioned, like kind of how you really put yourself in the shoes of a recruiter, you got to remember like these things. Number one, they're not almost certainly non-technical. And number two, they have very little time to go through your resume. You know, the 7.4 seconds, crazy tiny. And number three, they're going to have like hundreds of resumes to go through, which is why they only have that 7.4 seconds. So you have to do something in order to stand out. Yeah. So yeah, anything else here before we move on?
Just real quick, I think what you talked about with the recruiter only has time to, they have hundreds of applicants and they only have time to really talk to a couple candidates. I think that's really important. I'll tell you what happened when I worked at Pinterest is that when we would go to career fairs or when we would pick up resumes from some sort of applicant tracking system, like some ATS, but what happened is you would basically make 3 piles of resumes, a yes pile, a no pile, and a maybe pile. And the goal of a good resume is all you want to do is avoid the no pile. And ideally, you want to make it into the yes pile. And I think that framing of mind makes it really crystal clear what your objective is, right? Your goal is not to explain your life story. It's not to talk about how much you love a particular programming language. Your goal is to make it into the yes pile. That's really what you want to accomplish. And to accomplish that, what you're going to find in the next half hour or so is that Alex and I were not very adventurous when it comes to resumes. So if you're coming to the session looking for some sort of silver bullet or some sort of magic format, which is going to automatically get you more interviews, I think you're going to be disappointed. Our advice overall is going to be very straightforward and really kind of nothing like too over the top or too fancy. We're just going to stick to what has really worked. And that turns out to not be super creative. And the last thing I'll mention before we actually get into the main content is that there are a ton of services online where you pay them $100 or $500 and they'll give you a really fancy resume template, or they'll even offer you some sort of coaching. Well, they'll say, you know, we'll give you this really cool looking resume. And I think that those are really dangerous. I would really not recommend any of those because a lot of this information is available for free. And what those sites are doing is that they're trying to make you feel special, right? They're going to give you some really fancy template with a pie chart and different colors and different fonts, and they'll make you feel special and they'll get your money. But the actual audience for your resume, which is a recruiter or the company, they don't really care about that fancy template. And so I just want to caution everyone that, you know, if you have questions about this, this is what the community is for. We want this all to be free, but don't waste your money spending hundreds of dollars trying to get this information.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, I think the kind of moving on from the 7.4 seconds point, when you have so little time, you know, so little kind of this tiny window of this person, very important person's attention, the recruiter, you have to be extremely concise, ruthlessly concise. So this is this is kind of the bare minimum, I would say, when it comes to the ratio of like content to experience. But my rule of thumb is 1 page per 5 years of experience max. Some folks say you should only have 1 page of your resume per 10 years of experience. And I think that's pretty reasonable as well. For context, we'll look at this later, but my own resume right now is only 1 page. And I have 7 years of experience, 4 of which were at Facebook, because in the end, you only have 7.4 seconds. And if we kind of move on to like the next points here, if you're like really focusing on like making a huge impact in, you know, this essentially this 1 page, you don't really need multiple pages. So yeah, trim the fat. Kind of when you're putting stuff on your resume, like there's kind of 2 bars you have to clear. Number one, you know, is this an impactful statement? Is this a statement that someone can look at and be like, wow, this is impressive, I want to hire this person, right? That's kind of the first bar to clear. Second bar to clear is this line on my resume communicating a signal that isn't already communicated on my resume in like a different line, right? So for example, if you worked at a company and you've led a team of 10 engineers, that's pretty awesome. And then let's say, a couple months before, or a couple years before that, at the same company, you were more junior, you led a team of 5 engineers, right? That if it's like really early experience at like leading a team of 5 engineers, and the projects were similar, like it was like lower complexity because it's only 5 engineers, you might not need to put that down, right? Because they already know you can lead a team of 10, so that obviously means you can lead a team of 5, right? So like you have to be so cautious with like how you use space, because you have such a limited amount of space on your resume, that like you should go through this exercise for everything you put on your resume, literally every single line. Another mistake I've seen made, and we'll have examples kind of going through this, is be careful of what you claim as a skill on your resume. I've seen a lot of folks, like if they just have interacted with something at all, they will put it on their resume, like, oh, I followed a tutorial for like TensorFlow. I spent like a week on TensorFlow putting together this nice little demo app. Following a tutorial, they put TensorFlow on their resume because I've used it, right? Like I know very, very basic things, right? You want to avoid that. For mentions we'll like talk about later. And yeah, when it comes to the tech industry, what's really, I think, kind of special and honestly a bit kind of brutal as well is that stuff becomes outdated like crazy fast. I think this is like one of very, very few like industries on earth where you can do something, like some work in some technology or framework, and it's like super hot like right now, but then 10 years later it's like deprecated and like no one uses it anymore, right? You can see something go from like hero to zero in like just 7 to 10 years, which is absolutely crazy. So if you have a lot of experience, like think about the stuff you worked on 10, 15, 20 years ago. Is it really relevant now? Does any major company, any reputable company use the tech stacks I work with now? It's there's a good chance no. You can just remove that because it doesn't communicate any relevant signal to get hired in the modern kind of like job sphere. Yeah. And yeah, lastly, this is a very tactical piece of advice. Keep an eye on spacing. As mentioned before, spacing is so valuable because for the vast majority of people, you only have one page. So just from a tactical formatting perspective, make sure you're not using the space poorly. Yeah. And then to really illustrate these, let's go into some examples. So here's an example. This is actually from my old resume. Back at UCLA, there was a programming languages course, kind of the epitome of breadth versus depth. So instead of working with just one programming language and going deep on that, we work with like a bunch. Every week or two, we would have a new kind of coding assignment in a new language. We went through so many, pretty much everything you see here. Like, yeah, we went through both C and C++, OCaml, Prolog, JavaScript, Python. So a mix of like these kind of known languages and a mix of some of these very esoteric languages that I'm sure most of you have like never even touched. Like OCaml, I don't know a single like legitimate OCaml developer. But anyways, since I had all these programming languages, like technically I had some experience in them. On the first versions of my resume, I actually just put down all of them. So this is kind of what it was before. I just had this long, like kind of laundry list of all the things ever I've like touched and seen. And I learned, like luckily while I was still in school, I had another student at UCLA who's a study buddy of me and some of my other friends. Really talented student and engineer. He ended up going to Google straight out of school. Yeah, really, really talented guy. But yeah, he ended up looking at this on my resume. He was like, yeah, Alex, I think you should just remove these. This is actually dangerous. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, like when you put something down on your resume, you're signaling that you're quite proficient at it. You're pretty good at it. So what are you going to do if like, you go into an interview, like imagine you're going to an interview with like a very strong tech company like Google, and your interviewer happens to be this very senior OCaml developer, and then they ask you like, kind of in-depth questions about OCaml because they're like, oh yeah, you work on OCaml? I worked on OCaml. Like, what do you think about some niche thing that's only applicable to OCaml, right? And then he's like, on those questions, are you confident that you can answer them? Are you confident that you can come up with some response where you just don't get completely annihilated? And after he asked me that, which is essentially like the senior Google engineer test, like can you field questions from a senior Google engineer about these pieces of technology on your resume? After I thought about that, I think that really made sense to me. I was like, you know what? I think for most of these things, I would get annihilated if like someone who is actually really good with these languages asked me questions about it. So I just pretty much removed all the ones that I wasn't like super familiar with. At UCLA, our core languages were C, C++. So I pretty much reduced that language section to C plus C++, and I think Java as well coming out of school. And yeah, and nowadays I'm an Android developer. So when it comes to like languages I claim to be proficient in, I just have the Android ones, Java for Android and Kotlin for Android.
Yeah, and I think that framework for how to decide whether to put something on your resume is applicable not only for languages, but also your experience. Like the litmus test that you should be keeping in mind is if someone brings up that point in your resume and has a 10-minute conversation about it in your interview, would you be able to have an in-depth, smart conversation about OCaml or the particular experience that you had from 5 years ago? And if the answer is no, you're not able to eloquently talk about that experience or that programming language, then you should probably remove it. And that also has the very nice byproduct of it will do exactly what we just said, which is keep your resume very, very concise. So if you have something that you worked on in your second year of college, like a long time ago, if you're not able to talk about in depth what you did and why it was interesting from a technical perspective, then I really doubt that you should be putting that on your resume, not only because it'll waste space, but also because you're going to get destroyed if someone actually decides to grill you on that in the resume.
Yeah. So moving on, we have this example is a lot more basic, kind of alluding back to the point about watching out for spacing. Here we have something that I call a dangling new line. So in the before, like we have this kind of second line, but it only has a few words on it. So most of that, all that space afterwards on the second line is frankly wasted, right? So there's two ways to fix it. The after illustrates the first way, which is just add more content to that second line. So you actually use the space, communicate more signal. But if you don't have more content take up the second line, you can just try to make the existing content more concise and bring it from 2 lines down to 1 line. So you don't have this kind of second line that's barely used.
Nice. And then the next topic is around keeping it boring and simple. And so this is going back to what I said earlier, which is that, we're not going to really tell you anything too over the top or fancy. Our advice is really about keeping it simple and communicate the information in an efficient and as efficient a way as possible. And after reviewing hundreds and hundreds of resumes, we really feel strongly that the best way to do this is keep the formatting simple. And the consequence of that is you should really try and do 1-column resumes, no more than 2 columns. If you're talking about 3 columns, like you're making it much, much harder to parse out the relevant information. And I really would question that. So 1 column is best. The way to think about this is if you have a 1-column resume, it's obvious to me as the reader that, okay, I'm going to read it from top to bottom. If you give me a 2-column or 3-column resume, you're making me think, right? You're making my brain do a little bit of extra work. Okay, should I read this from top to bottom on the left column first or the right column first? Like you're putting a little bit more cognitive load on me. And that is exactly the kind of cognitive load that you don't want if you only have 8 seconds to impress me, right? So all these small things really make a big difference in your ability to get throughput and like get connected with the recruiter and make it into that yes pile. And this next one will become obvious when Alex shows his exact resume. He does a really good job of having really clear sections with dividers. There's a tension a little bit between keeping your resume really concise and 1 page, but also you want to make it very readable. And I think one of the key ways to make it readable is that you need to have really clear divisions between your work experience, your personal projects, your technologies that you know, and so on. Don't try and manipulate the margins so much that it becomes hard for me to read it. Avoiding paragraphs is also really important. This is actually not just applicable to resumes, but for example, at at Facebook and other companies that I've worked at, when I write my performance review, I almost always will structure the whole thing in terms of bullet points rather than paragraphs, because paragraphs, again, they require more cognitive load for the person reading the document to actually kind of keep in mind the structure of the paragraph and like how things connect together. Bullet points make it very, very obvious. What is the impact? What have I done? And you kind of break things down in a much cleaner way than paragraphs. So I really would recommend for all of your work experience and all your personal projects, you should structure it in terms of bullets. The next is being strategic with your usage of bolding or color coding. Going back to what Alex just said is that, you want your resume to be really kind of like muscle, in the sense that there's no extra fat that you can trim. And so if you adhere to that advice and you really have every sentence of your resume, every word of your resume, really packing a punch in terms of describing what you've done, then I don't think, my opinion is that you shouldn't go overboard, or in fact, you shouldn't really use any bolding or color coding, because that will detract, it'll just make it more distracting for me to read it. There's an example actually we have later on, which I think does a good job of highlighting certain things like the date and the company name, but the actual impact that you described, the bullet points, I think that you should have maximum, maybe one thing that you bold in there. And in my resume and Alex's resume, none of that is actually bolded. And then avoid wonky formats. This kind of goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, that, this is all about being straightforward and communicating the information about who you are, what you're good at, in a very efficient way. And like in the Slack channel, we actually have a channel that in the Slack community, we have a channel dedicated to helping people with resumes and giving them feedback, right? And I feel like a lot of people obviously are trying really hard, but they want to feel special. They want to feel creative. And they, as a result of that, they're using all of these very unique formats where they have like, I don't know, a pie chart, or they have like a self-rating assessment. And all of those things really like are detracting from the main signal that I want to get from you, unless you have a really compelling reason that you think it really does say something special about you. I really would avoid all that. And in fact, even if you think it does say something special about you, the fact that you're choosing something wonky or something unique to represent you, that itself is going to increase the cognitive load for me to read it, because I've never seen that before, right? And so that's, again, one more reason why you should really avoid that. And then the last point here is creativity doesn't replace proficiency. The point of the resume is to show that you're competent, you have the ability to deliver business impact to the company that you're going to get hired for. And so whether you pick a really cool color scheme or you have really a cool layout, that doesn't actually tell me anything about your ability to drive impact at my company, right? And so keep that in mind, that, your job is not to feel special. Your job is to get into that yes pile.
Yeah, so kind of to make all these ideas clear, here is a resume for me. This is essentially my most recent resume, the one before I went to Robinhood. So you can see like kind of all of these like principles kind of outlined here. So this is like, it's a bit janky because it's an image, but it is one page, even though I'm representing 7 years of experience, one column, very clear dividers, like between like work experience, the hero section at the top of all the kind of information, projects, etc. And the formatting is pretty boring. Like this is all stuff that can render just fine in Microsoft Word. Yeah, like we have I think the arrows for each bullet point are probably like the fanciest thing, but everything else is, I mean, pretty understandable how you can just do that in like a Word doc, right? Yeah, and everything is like very to the point. I don't spend like too long on any individual section, and we'll cover this more later, but like if you look at each individual line, you'll see like a lot of kind of metrics and impact, making it really clear like what I'm trying to do. And every point I'm trying to communicate and something unique is like, this is like a different way I added value, like to my company or to my personal project in the past.
Right. And a couple of things I want to point out here, and this is really a model resume, and I'm so glad Alex shared it as a resource. One thing I'll plug also is that Alex shared his very first resume when he was graduated from UCLA in LinkedIn. I think that's also a really good reference point to see what that might look like. One thing I'll do is after the session ends, I'll actually share my resume when I was graduating from Stanford in case that's helpful for all of you. To be totally honest, I'll share it and you'll take a look at it. There are a couple things that I look back at it and I'm like, I shouldn't have done that, or that wasn't the best use of space. And I'll comment on that. But in the spirit of transparency and kind of sharing my journey, I'll share that resume from 7 years ago that I had, and hopefully it'll be helpful to some of you. But what I wanted to call out here are a couple things. One is that, like Alex mentioned, really concise. He's not trying to fit in every small project that he worked on. He's really to the point and very quantifiable in terms of what he actually did. Like almost every line here has a number that describes what he did, which I think is pretty amazing. The other thing is the use of bolding and italics, right? So you'll notice, like I mentioned before, the actual content, he doesn't bold or italicize anything because the content itself, every word he writes has a ton of value, right? And so if you add a bunch of like random bold, I think that'll actually detract rather than add to the reading experience. But where he does use bold is, for example, in highlighting the company name and the dates. So that makes it much more obvious to me that there's a structure to the resume. The only thing italicized is the title that he held at that company. So that also makes it clear, like, what am I looking at? And the other thing, like small details, right? For example, he says something like August 2015 to June 2016, right? So some people will format the dates on their resume as 8/15 to 6/16. But there sometimes with certain dates, there could be ambiguity, right? Like if you say 8/10, does that mean August 10th or October 8th, right? So there are small things like that, which might lead to ambiguity. And again, it'll increase the time it takes for me to parse your resume. But if you get eyes on your resume from the community or from a friend or whoever, those are the kind of things that will get called out, and you can ruthlessly fix all of that and make it as simple, as easy, as straightforward to make that signal shine through.
So the next one here, this is like pretty straightforward, but it really matters a lot. And it's surprising how many resumes get this wrong, but spelling and grammar matter a lot. And I've interacted with many recruiters, talk with many recruiters. I personally, hiring is very important to me. So I always try to be involved in the hiring process for every company I joined. And a lot of them say like the number one way they toss out resumes is poor spelling and grammar. And I've read several articles from recruiters saying the same thing. And again, this is an exercise in kind of the empathy for the recruiter and taking on their perspective. So, the recruiter, only has a couple seconds to read your resume, right? So you got to make that time count. And then kind of like from your end, there's a time imbalance. So the recruiter only has like 7.4 seconds to read your resume, but you have effectively an infinite amount of time to prepare your resume, right? Like you don't have to apply to a job with a crappy resume. You can easily spend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10, 15, 20 hours like beforehand making your resume good, right? And for you, it kind of makes sense to do that because we'll talk more about this later, but Rahul and I, believe that you should just have one, very great hero resume that you can apply to every job with, right? So it's the effort is multiplicative. If you take the time to make a really, really good resume, the dividends paid on that are huge because you can use that everywhere. You can apply to 100, 200, 500 jobs with that one great resume, right? So from like this kind of impact and time spent perspective, it makes absolutely no sense if you don't essentially make a very great resume and spend a ton of time polishing your resume, right? It's one of the best investments you can make. And when it comes to spelling and grammar, it's a solved problem, right? Like there's so many tools out there that help you with spelling and grammar. You can get feedback from other people to help polish your resume, right? There really is like no excuse to like have, I would say, even a single basic spelling and grammar error. And I know a lot of recruiters, if they see like, one pretty egregious spelling and grammar error, they just toss it out. Because again, like if you're not taking the time to really polish arguably the most important document in your professional life, arguably one of the most important documents of your life, period, then what are you doing, right? That's not really a good hiring signal because it shows that you're not able to really pay attention to detail, and you're not able to prioritize what matters, right? So that's like, if I was a recruiter and I only have I'm dedicating these 5 to 10 seconds of my precious time to read your resume out of hundreds, and I come in and the spelling and grammar report, I would be insulted, right? It's like, come on, right? Like, what are you doing here? So, if you're if you're polishing your resume, like, just go through it. Like this, it's really it'll take some time, but it's relatively basic, right? Because as I mentioned before, spelling and grammar is more or less a solved problem. Just make sure you don't have any like basic spelling and grammar mistakes. There are, like as mentioned before, many awesome tools to help out here. Grammarly is really great, and of course, like if you're using like Microsoft Word, there's like spell check and all this other stuff. The tooling is amazing around making spelling and grammar of any document great. And if English is not your first language, leverage the community. Yeah, you may not be able to fully understand what the tools are telling you. Yeah, leverage the community. Rahul and I are currently building what I think, at least, is a pretty awesome community. And don't be afraid to just show your resume and be like, hey, does the phrasing of this sentence make sense? This is the optimal adjective here. I'm sure there's a lot of people who can help out. But yeah, the point is, like, spelling and grammar should be perfect on your resume, no exceptions.
One of the things, I 100% agree. I think there's a asymmetry I want to call out with your resume, in the sense that, like Alex mentioned, you will likely, given that one document, the resume, you're going to apply to 100 or 200 positions in the course of your job search with that one document. Whereas on the other side, someone is going to be spending maybe 10 seconds. And so there's an asymmetry in the amount of effort that you're putting into the resume versus how much effort is being put into reading that resume. And so if someone is able to spot and identify a mistake, a spelling or grammar mistake, within 10 seconds of reading your resume, that reflects really poorly on you. One of the things I think a lot about whenever I spend time on any activity is leverage, right? I mean, this is something that transcends resumes, because when I think about, should I spend my time making a YouTube video? Should I spend my time writing an article for the community? Should I, have a one-on-one with this person who's asking me for an hour of time? The thing I think about is what will give me the most leverage, like what will help the most number of people, what will have the highest amount of return for the time I put in. And in terms of making your resume really clear, concise, and free of mistakes like spelling and grammar, this is one of the highest leverage activities you can do. So that's really just underscoring what Alex said. I think you need to spend time on this. And this is, again, where the community will help, because getting that extra pair of eyes is a big way of how you can, eliminate mistakes. So this is probably the most important thing that we would like you to take away. If there's one thing you take away from this whole presentation, it is this concept of show, don't tell. Your resume has to be about showing what you know and showing your impact, rather than telling people about your impact. And this is the most common thing that we see that people do. They'll say things like, I'm a hard worker and I'm a really good Android engineer. Like, that's so obviously telling me that you're a hard worker. I don't really trust that, or I don't really believe it until you show me some numbers, until you show me some data to back it up. So the thing you have to get beyond is that, beyond just saying that you're good at something, you have to show the impact in what you're doing. And there are a couple of tactics that we always use, Alex and I will always use whenever we create resumes or whenever we critique resumes, that you have to use strong verbs that describe what you did. And I kind of think about this like coding, right? A big part of being a good engineer, a good software engineer, a good programmer, is that you have to use really descriptive language. So if you have a method name or a variable name, it tells you exactly what that class or that method, what it does. The same thing applies to resumes. So rather than saying something like, I participated in the launch of this product, don't use that verb at all. Participated is a very weak verb. Instead, use things like implemented, integrated, piloted, optimized, refactored. So now I have a much better sense of the actual thing that you did. How did you contribute to having that business impact? One format that I always recommend people use if you're struggling with what to write on your resume is this one, which is, I accomplished X measured by Y by doing Z. So for example, you could say, I accomplished or I increased the onboarding in our Android app by 30% by measured by Google or Firebase Analytics by integrating a new like onboarding flow and adding in more unit tests to reduce the number of bugs, right? So like with that structure, it makes it very clear to me what the business impact was, how you actually measured it, and what technologies or what frameworks you utilized in having that impact. And then another big thing here is that going back to that very first slide, you have to have empathy for the audience, and the audience is going to be a recruiter. And so a big thing here is that even if you're working on something very, very technical, you have to make sure that you describe your impact in a way that someone who is not an expert in your field can still understand what you've done and why is it impressive. So whether you're working on Android or some like deep, growth tactic or some machine learning thing, whatever it is, you have to make sure that you kind of come up from that and make it so that someone who is interested vaguely in the space but may not be an expert, they can still high level understand what you've done. And the final point here is that you have to publish and build, make it accessible to people in terms of being able to see your work. And this is especially applicable if you don't have work experience, right? So I think a lot of our audience are people who are in college, or maybe you're in a boot camp, a coding boot camp. And this last bullet point is so important because you don't have, a job already that you can point to and say, hey, I launched this feature which had this impact, or I did this thing on a team where I led this team, right? You have to basically create your own experience. And the way you create your own experience is you publish things, right? So build an Android app, build an iOS app, build an API, and actually put it on GitHub, like put it out there publicly, add a README, which describes what you've done, highlight your work. So actually putting yourself out there and like having a deliverable in mind is super important. And I think that some people will tell me like, I'm a backend engineer. Like, how can I make a deliverable? How can I make something that people can play with? And I think the answer there is I guarantee you can always figure out some deliverable that people can look at and play with. And it may not be an app, right? But if you're like a backend person, maybe you could write a really good Medium article or a blog post which describes what exactly is this backend component that you built on your own, or maybe make a YouTube video about it and publish it, right? You have to have some way to point to something and say, hey, I did that. That's really a key aspect of showing and not telling.
Yeah, and kind of a quick side note here, for folks who are working more on the product, especially like the front end side, like you're actually working with pixels on screen, which means you're either probably like web, iOS, and Android, and of course there's other forms of UI like Chrome plugin and like Mac desktop app stuff like that. When we say publish for you folks, we mean actually publish like a functional application that someone can just download and use. If it's a website, they can just navigate to and use. I think a lot of folks are good on, like a lot of folks are using GitHub nowadays, which is awesome. I think GitHub is an amazing tool, but that's kind of the bare minimum for like any functional coder. And we have to remember that, again, alluding back to the kind of championing the perspective of a recruiter, that GitHub is a technical tool for engineers. It's not really a tool for non-engineers, definitely not for recruiters, because it's meant to be a great home for code. But the recruiter cannot read individual lines of code that you've written, right? They can't look at the code you have on GitHub and be like, oh, this is quality code. Like this is like top-notch, like React architecture. They can't do that, right? Like at best, you have a good README and they can take stuff from that. But if you're working on the front end side, like actually like publish an app to Google Play or the Apple App Store, or actually like deploy a website to Heroku, because the recruiter can actually try that, right? If it's like a real like externally facing product. And if the recruiter looks at your project description on your resume and then they go, oh, this is pretty cool, like you want them to be able to try it out to really seal the deal. Like if they're interested in the project and then they actually click into it and they see that it's really smooth and flow is great and it has a bunch of other users, then that could seal the deal and get you the interview. But if you have a GitHub, then it's what can they do with that, right? It's mainly just a code repository. So of course, like if you're sharing your GitHub links in the resume, by all means keep doing that. It's better than nothing. But you should also be sharing the link to the public deployment of your project as well, because that's much more valuable to the recruiter than just a raw GitHub link with code.
And then I'll plug one more time at the end. Alex and I have been working on something which hopefully will be helpful in being able to showcase your work. And we'll talk more about that at the end.
Yeah, now we have some examples. So this is, I think, a pretty basic one in which I unfortunately see quite a lot. So the first one is a summary section. It's generally used as a brag section where it has all these kind of flowery sentences that Rahul like mentioned before about like how I'm super passionate and I'm a hard worker and I'm a great lead. This is essentially a telling section, which is why you shouldn't do this. It's frankly a waste of space. You should really let the work experience speak for itself. Like if you truly are competent and proficient in like what you're doing and like what you're applying to the job for, your experience like either working at companies shipping products or like building complex projects and getting impact, getting users there, that should speak for itself, right? You don't essentially need like a 3, 4, 5, 10 line section essentially telling them like how awesome you are. Like for example, I'm an Android engineer, right? I am not going to write a paragraph at the top of my resume telling people how awesome I am at Android. I show people how good I am by Android by the very lengthy track record of Android apps I've published with hundreds of thousands of users. That's, I think, a much more straightforward and frankly like honest and correct way of actually communicating the signal to the recruiter that I'm pretty good at Android. The second one, this is essentially kind of a more watered down version of telling, and that you have like some numbers going on, but it's still telling, and it's very common. Like I actually lifted this kind of little like these 5 kind of dots here with the red header from a resume template website, like one of these websites that Rahul alluded to earlier that we are strongly against. We think they're useless. Just keep it simple. You can more or less reuse my resume format and you'll be fine, I'm sure. But again, like when it comes to your skills, it's all relative, right? So like take me, for example. I've been working on Android for a long time. So for most people, they would see me as like a senior Android engineer, right? But there are a ton of Android engineers who are way better than me and have more experience and have deployed apps not just with a couple 100,000 users, but like with millions of users, right? My favorite example here is Jake Warden, who I consider like the most accomplished and senior Android engineer in the world. He's published so many different open source libraries that are used by like thousands of companies, to the point where some of his Android libraries are listed as like requirements or recommendations for Android job postings. Like if he was interviewing me, then like from his perspective, I could be like an Android noob. Like my accomplishments in Android kind of pale in comparison to what Jake Warden has done. Right. So that's why these sections, like these self-rating sections, are ultimately meaningless. Don't give yourself a score to try to feel special. Just let your accomplishments speak for themselves, and then the kind of who's on the other side, whoever is reading your resume, will interpret it as they will. Or you don't, it's not really a good use of time to kind of force them to like, hey, believe I'm a 5 out of 5, believe me, because again, it's all relative, and it's a meaningless statement.
I think in general, just avoid these self ratings. It's just a recipe for disaster if you get someone who's even more senior than you in that. It just doesn't go over well. I'll share one additional data point here. I forget if this person took it from a resume template or if he just thought he was being creative. But one person actually had a pie chart. It was just so interesting because it was like 40% Python. It was like a slice of the pie, which is 40% Python, like 25% HTML. And I forget what the other things were, but like basically he was trying to construct this like, whole pie and divide it up into different technologies. And that's the kind of thing where not only does it waste space, but I also don't have any idea what that actually means, right? What does it mean to be 40% Python? Like, are you telling me that you're really good at Python and you think about Python 40% of the day? Or like, I don't really know what that means, right? Like, unless you, again, like just stick with what is straightforward and stick with what is, commonly already people know about, and don't do anything too fancy here.
Yeah. So for this next one, I think hopefully this really makes it clear for folks here, like what it means to show instead of tell. So I essentially have this fake resume blurb, a before and after. These are the before section is stuff I've seen across real life resumes, and I just kind of cobbled it together into this kind of like pseudo but like realistic blurb that you would probably find something similar to on actual resumes. So I think like for a lot of folks, if you haven't really like gone deep into learning about how to optimize a resume and what it means to really show impact, this first section probably seems pretty reasonable to you. So yeah, we have Google login. Like we all know what that is. Firebase is quite popular nowadays, especially among more junior engineers, because it's a really quick way to kind of bootstrap like a backend and database service. So people are probably going, oh yeah, Firebase, I know what that is. Like you use Google login and Firebase. Those are cool things that I know. The unit tests, yeah, tests are great. Test-driven development. It means that he cares about the quality of the code. Yeah, JUnit Java. Yeah, JUnit's very known testing library in Java. Also sounds great. Yeah, migrations. Oh yeah, refactoring. That's cool. That probably means he's like some sort of technical lead. Yeah, he migrated this infrastructure to Room, which is, if you're an Android engineer, there's a good chance it looks pretty awesome to you. Room is a pretty new like Android database management library. Very, very neat. And of course, we have the last one, which is he's a lead. He even says he's a lead. He led the Android team. That must mean he's a lead. And he has great communication architecture skills. Those are senior engineer attributes, right? So this section, again, like if you haven't really gone deep into understanding what it means to show and communicate real impact, if you haven't really gone deep into those, and if you haven't gone to this session before and read Rahul and I's materials and resumes, this probably looks pretty good. But as you know by now, it's Rahul and I think this is a pretty bad resume blurb, as it's pretty much all telling, right? So if you look at the after section, we can go through line by line. So when it comes to the Google login and Firebase SDK, right? Like again, there's tutorials for everything, including how to add Google login with the Firebase SDK. Anyone can do it, right? So you don't go to a company, even if you go to a company to work on their onboarding team, just to add Google login with the Firebase SDK. You go to that company and that team to actually get more people through the onboarding flow and sign up more users for the app to add business value. So we can change this kind of first point to show the impact and show the skills that you actually demonstrate on team by communicating that once we added Google login to the onboarding flow, we increased signups by 30%, which is a huge win for the app. And then the first line here, which didn't exist in the previous section, which I think everyone should be doing, especially if they work for somewhere, is you can kind of communicate the impact of what you worked on by just illustrating the scale, right? So in the after section, I added a new line where it actually just goes through the metrics of the app, which is how many installs it has, how many active users it has, and the rating. And these are all publicly available. These are not things that are hard to get. And this communicates an important signal to the recruiter because, again, it shows that you worked on something that was inherently complex because it has a lot of users. Like if you work on an app with only 50 users, then who cares? It doesn't really matter what awesome code you wrote for that app. It only has 50 users. What company can be built off of an app with 50 users? But if it has half a million users, then okay, now we're cooking. We got something, right? And I think a lot of this kind of really illustrates the point, because I think a lot of folks, they see the point of engineers is to write code, and that is what you do, yes, but it's actually not what the company wants you to do. Rahul has talked about this a lot. The point of an engineer is to add business impact. So, and then code is just kind of the tool you use to achieve that. So it's actually interesting in that a lot of these apps with a ton of users actually have really bad code behind them. But again, when it comes to hiring, when it comes to recruiter, they don't really care really about the quality of the code, because in the end they want results, right? They want to hire you so you have results. So it doesn't matter if you come in and you frankly don't write the perfect code. If you're able to get hundreds of thousands of extra users and greatly increase metrics, I mean that's a win. That's what the company wants you to do. But anyways, moving on, if you go to the testing one, right? Again, we're trying to illustrate the impact here. Test coverage, I think, is a very kind of clear and pretty easy to understand way of really illustrating the impact. So 0 to 80% shows that there were no tests before, and now there's a bunch of tests. And then in the end, you write tests to prevent bugs, right? So we actually show the impact now of saying hey, when we add these tests, I didn't just add a bunch of tests. I just slow down the CI on diffs and flake out. They actually reduce the amount of bugs, which is again great for the company. It makes the reputation of the company much better, having a less buggy product. Again, with the migration, anyone can migrate something, and sometimes migrations are bad because it takes a lot of effort and there's a lot of thresh. So again, we want to illustrate the impact here. So by moving to the Room SDK, kind of like these kind of low hanging fruit, like kind of schema update bugs where maybe you like, typo a field or something, those are reduced because now it's all like very structured. And again, like when it comes to like leading the Android team, again, like led the Android team with strong communication, architecture skills, classic telling. Anyone can say that, right? So how do you really show that you were not only like you had the Android lead title, but you actually like, led the team and was able to grow it, and people grew under you and had a good experience, and teams able to accomplish impact. When it like we changed this, so like not like when it comes to actually growing, like leading and growing a team, you actually did that by owning the hiring process, and then you grew the team from 1 to 5 engineers, which again, adding numbers is pretty much always a good thing. It really shows the impact you added. Like you essentially took this important product for the company, Android app, and the team behind it, and you grew it. In this case, 5x. The example illustrated here is a startup. For those of you who are wondering. Yeah, and then the last line is technologies used, just to make it really easy for the recruiter to understand what technologies you've worked with. This is essentially the keyword soup, because a lot of jobs, they'll have like this laundry list of technologies, like 3, 4, 5 technologies, and then the recruiter wants to be able to quickly go, hey, have you actually used all these things? And then this kind of keyword soup, technologies used section, makes it really easy for the recruiter to do that. Yeah, Rahul, anything to add here?
Yeah, I think this is great. Like one thing I'd love for everyone to do is just take their own resume and look at this slide and check, are you more in the before section or more in the after section? Like, this is such a good example of how you can take something which is, in my opinion, frankly, mediocre and wouldn't really get into the yes pile, and turn it into something which really is quite impressive. There are 2 things I want to call out. One is that some people are afraid of putting metrics on, especially if they work at a company, because they think that there's something confidential about that. But there is always a way to frame it in a way that you're not actually revealing anything confidential. And I think what Alex showed here is actually a very good example of that. In that second bullet point, he talks about increasing signups by 30%. In that third bullet point, reducing customer bug tickets by 50%. So deltas are almost never confidential, right? So if you say something like, I increased, or I had this amount of change, you're not actually revealing anything personal, but you're still showing a really concrete amount of impact that you had. So that's like one thing that you can do to always make sure you have some way to quantify your impact without revealing anything. And the second thing I want to call out here is that I think that the technologies used, I really love that structure. Rather than having one big word soup at the beginning, like Alex mentioned, having this in line with your experience really will contextualize what technologies you used when. And that can be used as a jumping off point when you have the conversation with the recruiter or in the actual interview. It becomes much more clear what technologies you use to achieve that business impact, rather than having like, a big list of things where I'm not really sure. Did you use this 2 jobs ago, or are you currently using it, or did you only use it in school a long time ago, right? So this is a really helpful way to format that. In terms of how to structure top to bottom, how your resume should work. And again, we're recommending 1 column formats, unless you really want to go to 2, that's maybe acceptable, but definitely 1 column is recommended. The way you should structure it top to bottom is start with most practical and then go down to less practical. The goal with your resume is to show that you can ship production level code. If you're a software engineer, coding and writing code is the tool by which you have the business impact. And so even though, that's not like the thing that the company and the customers care about at the end is being able to accomplish the thing that they want with that application or with that software, right? But the way you typically will do that as a software engineer is because you have this technical know-how. And so you want to be able to demonstrate that. The way you typically will demonstrate that in the most direct way is if you have prior work experience. Especially if it's at a related company, right? So if you, for example, work at, Facebook, and then you get a job at Snapchat, like Facebook and Snapchat, they're in a very similar domain, right? Like they're both social networks. And I'm sure a lot of the challenges that one company faces are similar. So that's like very obvious. And even if you don't have like a similar domain or similar industry, having some amount of professional work experience proves that you can actually ship production code. After that is personal projects. And this is something where you have control over it. You don't have any gatekeepers who are telling you you either are hired or not. You can literally, in 1 week, I can promise you that if you follow a tutorial online, you will be able to publish an Android app, right? So personal projects are really powerful as a way to actually ship production software, production in the sense that you shipped it to production. And they're really, especially if you're able to get users on those apps or those APIs or those models that you've deployed and built, that is super impressive. And in fact, for both Alex and I, we attribute a lot of our success and a lot of the promotions that we've gotten in the tech industry through personal projects. So I don't think these are exclusive. I think you should definitely, obviously, have work experience. We should augment that with your own personal projects. And then finally, education. And education is great, especially if you went to a school which is signaling to people that you were able to jump through some hoops and you were able to like get through some selective admission criteria. That does tell me some positive signal about your ability to work hard, right? Like if you went to Harvard or you went to like, Carnegie Mellon, yeah, I imagine you probably studied hard on the ACT or the SAT and you did well on the GRE, whatever it is, right? So like that gives me some signal. But the issue with education is that you almost never ship production code. So like if we go back to the previous slide, like the before example, which we keep referring to and we keep hating on as something very mediocre, I have a lot of empathy for people who are coming out of college and they write resumes like this, because the entire point of university is to learn technology, to like be able to say, I know Java now, I know how to use this API, right? But the issue is that university and college doesn't prepare you for the job market, right? Like the point of the job market is to ship things. And when you go to school, you don't ship things, you're like doing theoretical academic exercises. And so that is really the chasm, the issue that so many people, especially earlier on in their career, they get wrong. You have to shift from this mindset of being able to say, I know this technology, to saying, I use this technology to achieve this thing that is going to be very valuable to you and your company. Alex, anything to add here?
Yeah, I think this is more or less on point. This is the structure of my current resume, and I firmly believe in it. Essentially, when the company is looking at your resume, looking at you in the hiring pipeline, they're asking the question like, hey, can this person add business impact to the company, right? Can they make us more money? Pretty much the vast majority of the time, unless you're like a nonprofit or something. And when it comes to how you structure your resume, you essentially want to order things from top to bottom, where the things at the top show the most signal that you can ship business value. And of course, that generally means you worked for another business and you added business value there. And then, things at the bottom are essentially the most disconnected from any business value. And that's usually education.
Actually, before we move on, sorry, I remembered two other quick things. In this category of show, don't tell, I want to just say two quick things. One is that I think that you should avoid too much personal information, avoid showing too much personal information on your resume. But things like your photo, like a headshot, your gender, whether you're a parent, like how many kids you have, like all of that stuff is irrelevant to you being a really good engineer who can ship code, right? And not only will it waste space, but the harsh reality is that I think that these are actually going to introduce biases. If you tell me you're a parent, or if you show me your photo, like everyone is going to associate something either positive or negative to how you look or where you are in life. And that's the kind of thing that you really don't want to include on your resume, because your resume should be focused on what you do rather than who you are. And the second thing I want to mention here is that some people will include things like their references on their resume, or they'll include a bunch of social links. And again, I think going back to this theme that you've heard Alex and I talk about a dozen times now, you want to keep it really concise. So things like references, where you say, here are like 3 people who can talk about how I work, that should never go on the resume. That will happen once you get through the interview stage. Social links, there's so many out there, like Stack Overflow, Medium, Quora, Dev.to, Skype, all these different things. You should really limit it to maybe picking maximum 3 or 4. More than that, I think it just gets overwhelming and it's a waste of space.
Cool. All right. So we have a new slide here for if you're somehow here and you also went to the first instance of the session we gave back in May, we didn't have this slide before. But anyways, this slide is about the ATS. ATS stands for Applicant Tracking System. I actually didn't know what like I've worked with ATS before, but I didn't actually know there's a term for this until I started this community with Rahul, because a lot of folks were talking about like, oh, how about the ATS? How do I deal with the ATS? And I was like, what the heck is an ATS? So I learned what an ATS is for this community and to make this slide. But anyways, yeah, it stands for Applicant Tracking System. It's essentially the software that the company uses to kind of process applications. Like, you know, you'll apply and then your resume will go into the system, and then they'll use it to like kind of manage like the candidate's progress throughout the interview loop, assuming they, you know, they get a pass to enter it in the first place. And the important thing here is the ATS, you know, does take in and process your resume. So there are some implications here about how you should write your resume. So here's kind of the advice we have here. This is mainly lifted from a awesome article that a member of our community, I think her name is Kathleen, shared with us. And you can actually find that article in the event feed, LinkedIn event feed for this resume event. But anyways, number one, have your core tech terms. So as mentioned before, a lot of recruiters will just kind of do a quick kind of keyword matching. Like if they're hiring for like a React web developer position, for instance, they're gonna look for the term React on your resume somewhere. So yeah, you should have these core tech terms, like, you know, these really, really big general ones, like not like Room for Android, that's very niche, but like for React, like I think everyone knows what React is, even non-technical people. Have those on your resume. Maybe even have like a kind of key skills section at the top. I don't have that on my resume anymore, but I can see like why it's useful. It gets all these core tech terms out of the way. Number two, keep the formatting simple. I think the thing about ATSs is that like sometimes they don't support a lot of these like kind of really crazy formats. Like you give a headshot or like a pie chart or something, it'll just come out like it's like you got to put it in a blender. So again, this is like additional evidence that you should keep it simple. I think it's actually recommended that you use Microsoft Word, like you use a doc format to make your resume, because when you use a doc, you are limited to relatively kind of basic characters and formatting tools. So if it loads okay in Microsoft Word, it'll probably almost certainly load okay in the ATS. So like that's actually how I built my resume. I didn't realize I was actually behaving in an optimal way with ATS. I just kind of did it on accident. But like back when I was making my resume, like initial resume at UCLA, and I still do this, is I make it in Word. And then that's like kind of the core resume I have is a .doc file, but I also convert it into a PDF because a PDF does look cleaner. So yeah, and then if I can submit both, I just submit both. And then this is kind of the main point here, which is not from which you can't really find in the article. Do not over optimize for the ATS. And this is something I've seen from a lot of people in the community because I've talked with so many people about their resumes now, reviewing the resumes and just kind of going over sharing feedback. I have all these folks, they kind of go through these crazy hoops. They're like, oh, I need to make this work for the ATS. And they do like some like really wonky specific thing. And then it ends up making the resume look bad, but they're like, it's for the ATS. It's like, you know, this is going to get me through the ATS. And it's just confusing to me because I'm just like, you realize a human is going to have to eventually read it, right? Like, from my understanding, the ATS could be used as kind of like a weeder layer, like that kind of tosses out, you know, like really weird resumes that are maybe even lacking all the core keywords in general. But in order for you to kind of get on the interview loop and, you know, again, start taking time from the folks within the company to interview you, a human is almost certainly going to have to approve your resume to put you in that loop. And that's, you know, almost certainly going to be a recruiter. So it doesn't matter if your resume is like some 5,000 IQ thing that clears the ATS with flying colors. If it looks bad for a human, you're not going to make it anyways. So what's the point?
Yeah. I think that last point, I just want to emphasize that. Optimize the resume for a human, not for the ATS. And I think that, I think that the ATS, it almost never, in my experience, will automatically reject you. And in fact, I think that in many countries, or many states, it's illegal for the applicant tracking system to automatically reject candidates. If anyone is aware of a company that automatically rejects you based on the ATS, please message me, because I have a bunch of concern with that. Like if there's some automated AI robot which is looking at my name or my resume, like my experience, or somehow determining in an automated way that I am not fit for a job, I have a ton of concern from the AI bias and AI ethics perspective around that. Like there's a huge host of discrimination problems that will come for certain categories of people if it is indeed true that an ATS is automatically rejecting large groups of people. Like I can understand if the ATS will reject you just because you have a badly formatted resume, which like it's like, you know, more than 2 pages or more than 3 pages, and like they say, okay, we don't care about those people. Like that makes sense. But if it's trying to determine based on my location or name or any of these other attributes and it's rejecting me, that's a huge red flag. So I really don't think that that happens. If it does happen, please message me. I would love to follow up on that. But again, like the point here is don't over optimize. You should optimize for having a solid resume, which is straightforward and easy for a human to read.
All right. So for the next slide, as mentioned before, a lot of folks in our community are on the more junior side. So it doesn't really, it's great to have all these awesome formatting and structure tips. But if you don't have a lot of stuff to put on your resume, it's, you know, what do you do, right? It's, I can make this look nice, but I don't really have much stuff to go into the this to begin with, right? So the purpose of this slide is, you know, how do you get more quote unquote meat for your resume? And as I mentioned before, it's like, you know, in the end, if you're optimizing something, the kind of core thing that you're optimizing is also very important. If that core is very weak or non-existent, it doesn't really matter how, you know, how pretty you make it look. In the end, there's not much there. And if you know your core is not very strong, then it's going to be hard to find jobs. So the question is, like, if you're a very new engineer, how do you add more stuff to your core? You know, how do you have more stuff to optimize to begin with? And for this problem, Rahul and I strongly believe in side projects, and Rahul kind of alluded to this before, and that when it comes to personal projects, there's no gatekeeper, right? Especially now, anyone can follow a tutorial, create a free Heroku account, and deploy something that's used by, you know, a couple thousand users free in like a week. It's really not that hard. And the way that kind of Rahul and I frame it is, side projects are a way for you to get what is quite close to work experience without actually like working for an actual company. Because like if we go back to the kind of the purpose of a company, right? Like of a tech company, like the goal of the tech company is to ship a software product at scale, you know, to many users, and then their goal is to make revenue off of it. So that revenue part is a bit tricky, but like, you know, let's focus on the shipping software at scale part, right? The shipping software at scale part is quite easy to do on your own nowadays, and much easier than people think. And like for me, this point here is kind of like sacred, and it's important to me personally, because this is actually how I started my career, really. So if we go way back to the intro section, like an hour and a half ago, when I talked about my career, my first job was at PayPal as a full stack engineer working on Java backend stuff, right? So let's remember that. And then my next job was working as an Android lead at a startup where I built an Android app from scratch. So see the disconnect here. I was not working at Android before. And then I transitioned to a job as a lead working on Android. So how the heck did I do that, right? Like what company would hire someone with zero professional Android experience as their Android lead? Well, the answer to that question of how the heck did Alex do this is because I had really great Android side projects. Ever since I was at UCLA, I started as a rising junior back in 2013. I was just building Android apps for fun. I actually knew coming out of UCLA that I wanted to be an Android engineer, but just given the job availability at PayPal, PayPal wasn't like super advanced on the mobile apps yet. There wasn't an Android position, so I got hired for this kind of full stack position and ended up working on backend. I couldn't do Android there, but I knew I wanted to become an Android engineer. So I kind of, you know, I kept my eyes on the prize, and I was like, well, I want to get hired as an Android engineer. I need to overcome my lack of professional Android experience. I'm just going to build Android apps that I think are fun and useful, and I'm going to make them really good and try to get lots of users on them. So yeah, starting as a student at UCLA, I was building Android apps for fun. that's what I knew. Like I wanted to become an Android engineer coming out of school because I had a lot of fun building these apps. I would just build like kind of small, like silly apps and some that are more like technically and useful. And by the time I left PayPal, I had published, I think, like 5 or 6 apps at this point, and I like 2 of them had like over 10,000 users. And I did this for free. I was just like just building this, from my dorm room at UCLA, and just like from my from my like place after I started working full time at PayPal. And that was essentially what got my foot in the door. I was actually able to get 2 offers as an Android engineer, despite having zero professional Android experience. And I remember in the interview loop for Course Hero, I actually talked about like how I built my side projects, one of my more complex ones, during the interview, during the system design round with the CTO of the company. And I I probably had a good impression there because I got hired. So that kind of worked out. And yeah, I truly believe in the power of side projects. I know it sounds daunting, like, hey, we're essentially telling you like if you're a junior engineer, like try to make an app that gets like a few hundred, few thousand users. That seems scary and like hard to do, but it really is quite achievable, and it's much more achievable than people think. And Rahul and I want to teach you how to do that, which I think segues into the next slide.
Yes. So I've hinted at this a couple of times throughout the session, but this is a something that Alex and I have been thinking about for a very long time. We've actually been spending a lot of time in the past few months actually trying to manifest this tool into life. Basically, we want to help you. We've heard again and again, like a big thing around resumes is like, I don't know what to put on my resume, or I don't have anything to really show. I don't have enough experience yet. So we really believe in the transformative power of personal side projects, personal software projects. Alex literally got his position through this, through his journey as a personal developer. And so we are trying to build a tool which will help you get feedback and showcase that work. And so what we're trying to focus on is projects that you've built yourself. So if you're part of a company, then we're not really trying to optimize for optimize for that audience. We want to help people who have actually built substantially all of their project on their own. We're really focused on these indie projects or personal projects. And the reason we're so bullish on this is because we really think, like Alex just mentioned, these are a primary lever to advance your career in tech, especially if you're a student or a bootcamp grad or you're newer in your career. This is, in my opinion, the best way to really get better. And in fact, I'll go even further to say that within 10 years, maybe even faster, I really think that no matter where you went to school or who you know, or any of the kind of other things around being an engineer that maybe people get jobs through right now, none of that will matter. In 10 years, if you don't have a project that you have shipped and you have people using it and you've done it on your own, you will have a very, very hard time getting a software engineering job. And so right now, it's like a huge advantage if you are able to ship something and show it off to people and get people excited by it. In 5 or 10 years, it's going to be a requirement. And I think this is like the intersection of 2 trends. One is that the cost of being able to ship your software on your own is coming down and down and down in the past 10 years. You have things like Heroku, or you have these mobile app ecosystems like Google Play or the App Store, which make it so easy for one developer to be able to publish something on their own. Whereas 10 or 15 years ago, that would have been very, very hard to do. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I'm sure many of you here have heard of like the creator economy or the creator world, right? So many people are becoming creators, and I think developers are no exception. You don't have to be in this 10,000 person organization to have impact. You can do that on your own. And we want to help facilitate that. We want to give you feedback on that. We want to help you succeed. And so with that, Alex and I just have been working on this for a few months now. It's called imberapp.com. That's the best domain name we could get. The idea here is that on Imber, you can create a portfolio by submitting your Android, iOS, or web projects. And Alex and I are committed 100% for the first 1,000 projects, probably even more. As long as we can continue doing it, we are going to give you really detailed and thorough feedback. We're going to download your app, try out your website, and give you feedback about what we think is really cool about it, how it could get better, and what you can do to make more improvements. And the cool thing here is that we also have Android and iOS apps because, we're mobile developers. So Alex did a really great job, and we have this Android and iOS app that just search for Ember on the Play Store or the App Store. You should be able to find it.
Yeah, or you can just use the links I shared. That's probably way faster.
Yeah,
So yeah, in the Zoom chat, I shared a link to this new platform we've made essentially to facilitate better personal software projects in particular. A big point about this community is accessibility, make kind of quality tech support available to everyone free of charge. And we wouldn't really be honoring that if this platform wasn't available on all the different services. So we built a website, built an Android app, and we built an iOS app, all from scratch, all native. So yeah, please give it a try. We spent a lot of time on this. I think we're currently in an alpha phase. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rahul. So it's going to be quite rough because it's pretty early stage, and it turns out building something of this complexity is quite difficult. Who knew?
Well, yeah. let me touch on that point. I think that's super important. Like, here's what Alex and I believe. Like, our thesis is that personal projects are heavily underutilized in the job market as a way to get a job or advance your career in the job. And Alex and I are lived experience, like we are examples of how we've benefited from that. So we really believe that something like this needs to exist. So there is no existing platform where you can showcase the personal projects you've built in a constructive community where you can get feedback. So that's what we believe. The manifestation of how that will turn into a product, that will change and evolve over time. Alex and I, we have full-time jobs. We've been doing this on the side over the past few months. And I like, based on the 10 or 15 people who have been using it so far, like a very tight-knit group of people, I've been really impressed with the kind of projects that have been uploaded. But again, like, the thesis is that we need this product to exist. We really believe that it'll be really helpful for you in the job market, and we're going to help you get additional jobs in the future if you want that using Ember. But just keep in mind that this is very early. Things will change. You might see some things that are, rough edges, but we're committed to giving you feedback, trying out your product, and we'll do that for as long as we can, until we have too many people on the app, which will be a good problem to have.
Yeah, something I've talked about before, do the thing we don't scale. So like, if you go to, Ember on any platform, the iOS app, Android app, or the website, you'll see that Rahul and I, at least one of us, have commented on every single project uploaded so far. And we try to give very tactical, concrete feedback on how you can improve, your app or website. We're not just going to be like, oh yeah, this feels clunky, because it could be valid advice, but it's really hard for someone, especially a junior engineer, to kind of convert that into something actionable. We'll tell you like, hey, like, maybe we can tweak the app store listing, or maybe we can add this feature or remove this feature, or like, there's this bug here that if we fixed it, we think would be high impact. We give that kind of advice, and that's kind of what this community is all about, giving very clear, actionable advice. That also respects the nuance of the difficulties of tech, all for free. And I think Ember is a great way for us to do this. And I think what makes me really excited about Ember is that this is probably one of the least solved problems in the tech space. Resumes, writing a really good resume is hard. It takes effort. But for the most part, writing a great resume is solved. I have reviewed so many resumes at this point, a lot of which are for the community, probably like over 150, 200 for the community. And 95% of my advice is just make your resume more like mine. Because again, like, when it comes to writing a really great resume, it's more or less solved. You just have to learn the execution. But when it comes to projects, like, this is such a new space. Like, only, I would say, in the past like 5-6 years has it become super easy to deploy an app or website to production. It's not solved, and every app is different. So kind of the feedback and kind of teaching someone how to build a really good project is much more difficult, and that's what makes me excited about this problem, and that's what I want to help you guys with.
Yeah, so we've talked about this a good amount of time. So hopefully it's clear like what we're trying to build. We're definitely a long way to go before we kind of have the vision in our head but it's a long time before that vision comes to reality, but we're on that path. So call to action here, just summarizing. If you have an Android, iOS, or web project, which is actually published, right? That's important because Alex and I want to be able to try out the experience that you've built in order to give meaningful feedback. So if you have that project which is actually published, and right now we're focused on these kind of more front-end focused projects, then please do go ahead and sign in on Ember and create that project. And we're going to try our best to like give you really concrete feedback. And then eventually the goal is we want to be able to have this be the central repository where you can show people, hey, if you want to take a look at anything I've built, check out Ember, check out my profile. And that'll be a really captivating way to get opportunities. So speaking of, these personal projects or side projects, hopefully you're going to upload something on Ember and you're going to have a project. And the natural question is, how can I make it look really impressive? How can I actually get people to use this product? And so that is exactly the topic of our next session, which is how to build and grow tech products to 100,000 or more users for free. You don't have to spend a penny on any kind of advertising. And Alex has done this multiple times over. I have a couple apps which have like 50,000 downloads, but I'm not at like Alex level yet. But I think that we definitely have a lot of advice to share about how you can do this, and a lot of mistakes that we see people make when they're trying to grow their own products. But this is going to be a little bit more than a month away. It'll be on Saturday, October 2nd. Alex, thank you for dropping the link in the Zoom chat. If you're on YouTube, if you click on the description of the video, you should be able to see the link for the event here. And if in general, if you want to get informed about future events, we're going to try and have events every couple of weeks. Then, one more plug here for the community on LinkedIn or Slack.
Yeah, so a big thing about this community is we're all about synergy. Like we want to connect all the pieces together because, well, they are interconnected, and we want to kind of shed some light on how they're connected. So we don't just want to tell people that, hey, build better projects and then not teach you how to do it. So we're going to go in depth in this session on how to do it. We've actually given a few sessions on side projects before. The previous big side projects, all personal projects session was about like coming up with the idea. If you want to learn about that, join us on Slack, and you can see kind of the old materials there, and also on Rahul's YouTube channel. So once you have an idea and you're pretty confident in like the product market fit and the user value here, how do you actually build it, grow it? And we saw, we've done like some polls in the past, like what are you struggling with when it comes to personal projects? And one of the most voted for responses was, I don't know how to get users. So we will teach you how to do that in this session. Like, how do you build a quality MVP? And then after you build a quality MVP, how do you like properly iterate on it and foster a community around it and actually get users? And I actually don't think I touched on this that much. Like Rahul has alluded to, and I've alluded to kind of my side project experience before, but I've done this, believe me when I say I've done this a lot. So I've published around 30 apps to Google Play at this point. I just love Android. And combined, they have, I think, 2.3, almost 2.5 million installs. I have 4 apps with over 100,000 users. If you expand that to over 50,000 users, I think I have 7 apps that have over 50,000 users. And when it comes to over 10,000 users, I think I have 12 to 14 apps that have over 10,000 users. So I've done this many, many times. It's almost like clockwork at this point for me. And I want to learn, I want to help you guys learn these skills and share these kind of like teachings with all of you.
Yeah. So we're going to get to questions. I actually just want to do a quick tangent. I want to share a very funny story about building and growing tech products. So I think Alex is like the god of being able to grow apps, especially on Android. He's done this more than 30 times. He's literally an outlier in terms of being able to do this and do this in a reproducible way that you can learn from. And I think his advice will apply for any kind of project. But on my end, so a lot of the apps I've published on Android have been as a byproduct of me doing a tutorial on YouTube. And so there's one tutorial that I made called Emoji Story, which is really, really simple. It was basically you can update your status using only emoji. And the reason it was kind of a cute app to build and to show off as a learning mechanism is that it involved 3 different Firebase services. So it was a really nice way for me to demonstrate some of the power of Firebase. And so I published that app. I'll actually link it here in Zoom. But the really funny thing about this is that it kind of blew up without me trying to make it blow up. So literally every day I'm getting hundreds of downloads on this app. And at this point, I have like 60 or 70,000 people who have downloaded the app. But the issue is that I never intended for this to blow up. And so what's happening now is that people are downloading the app thinking that, oh, this is some really cool emoji related application. They try it out and they say the only thing I can do is update my status using a smiley face or some sort of emoji. And then they leave me a bad review. And so it's kind of it's kind of funny because like twice or thrice a week, a couple times a week, I'll get like this 1-star review on this app. And oftentimes it'll be in some other language. It'll be like in Russian or Arabic. And so I get the 1-star review, and I have to actually click through in order to translate it to see what they're actually saying. And it's almost always like, oh, this is a garbage app. So like now I'm at this kind of weird place where like I have a ton of users, but almost all of them hate the product. So I'm not sure whether I should upload this project onto my Ember profile or not. Alex, maybe me and you, we should, I'd love your advice there about what I can do to, to adjust this to get higher ratings or just take it out. But I was like, my funny aside on an app that I published.
Yeah.
So,
going back to Ember, actually, sorry, Rahul, for cutting
sure.
off you here. I just wanted to add a point here, and we'll talk about this actually in the next session. We would really love for all of you here to join us at Ember, because this is, to me, this is actually the most fun stage, like the early stage when you're kind of building the community and more importantly, interacting and supporting the community. How you can see this is essentially the phase where you can tell Rahul and I what to do. This is a really early stage product. Like we're frankly kind of embarrassed by the lack of features it has, but we want you to tell us essentially like, what are those features that you want that we need to build? Like we know that we're missing a bunch of awesome features, and Rahul and I have brainstormed probably 10,000 different things that we can add, but we can't add all 10,000, right? We'll be coding this for like 500 years, right? Like which ones do we add first? And we need you to tell us. So if you find like an issue, like you're missing a feature that you think would be really helpful, or you just find a bug, please let us know. And we're going to try to fix that as soon as possible. We're going to be dedicating a lot of our time to this over the next couple months, well, maybe a couple years. We'll see how it goes. And the platform of Ember is extremely malleable at this point by you guys, because in the end, like we do what we do for the community. We want to meet you guys where you are and support your needs. And when it comes to Ember, like we want to champion that same mentality as well. So you can essentially add code to Ember through us. Just give us your feedback. Like we've talked about this before in previous session, but we truly believe that feedback is a gift. One of the most valuable resources that you can get. So we would love any and all feedback from everyone here.
Yeah, literally, you'll create a profile on Ember and you'll upload a project. We literally don't have a notification system. So the only way, like in order to read the comments that Alex and I give on your project, you will literally have to open up that project and click through on all your projects to see which ones have you gotten a comment on. So that's like an obvious thing. Like we need to figure out how to notify people when there's a comment on one of their projects. So we're gonna work on that. But like Alex mentioned, we're super early. And the point of this is that, we have maybe 400, 500 people who are still on the call about an hour and a half or almost 2 hours into the Zoom session. So you are exactly the kind of people. We trust you. We love that you're with us in this community. We want to help you. So you are literally the kind of people that we want on Ember in order to be able to give feedback, for us to give you feedback on your projects and how we can help you, but also for you to give feedback to us. So this is really like a two-way street of feedback.
All right. So I think we can get the Q&A now. I have this awesome slide. I think we started doing this in the previous Q&A session, but now we have a slide now explaining how Q&A works. So this is a tradition within tech career growth community for the relatively short time it's lived, but tradition, kind of the scope that we are working with here. But after every session, as mentioned before, like we want to interact with folks in this community. We want this relationship to be bidirectional. And I think the core way we champion that in these sessions is we answer your questions. It allows us to talk to folks in the community directly. And we just love hearing people's voices and helping you out in the most direct way possible. It feels very communal. And it feels like, it really feels like a great exercise for us to kind of get to know one another. So yeah, if you have a question, it requires you to be on the Zoom call. So if you're on YouTube and you want to ask us a question, with your voice, then join us on Zoom. I will link something in the YouTube chat, or maybe one of the moderators, or Zeus Almighty is one of the folks who moderates the YouTube chat, for those. Bit of a fun fact there. But anyways, we'll drop a link to the Zoom.
We love you.
And yeah, if you have a question for us, use the reactions feature in Zoom. Raise your hand. We will do it on a first come, first serve basis. I think we can take questions for 40-45 minutes, and we'll try to go through them as quickly as possible. It's interesting because like Rahul and I, like you guys ask such amazing questions, and we're always so tempted to both give an answer to the question, but then it ends up taking up way too much time. So yeah, only one of us will answer. Please only ask one question at a time. If you have like 3, 4, whatever questions, go back for the sake of equity and fairness, please go back to the end of the line after you ask your first question. And no worries, if we can't get to your question in person on this call, we will answer it in Slack. And I can add a link to the Slack as well. Now, Rahul, anything I missed here?
No, that's perfect. I think this slide is so helpful. Like for the first like 8 or 9 sessions, we didn't have this and it was kind of confusing, but like now it's clear.
Yeah.
I see 20 hands raised on Zoom. So we'll get to that. Before we do that though, I know that some people may want to drop off and just like connect with us asynchronously, or maybe connect with us on Ember, hopefully even better. But before we get to the questions, let me just one more time. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday, a big part of your Saturday with Alex and I. It means so much that, we've been able to grow this community and help so many people. So here's our LinkedIn's one more time. And then if you just scroll back up on the Zoom chat, you'll be able to find the links for LinkedIn and Slack. We really want to make this as helpful as possible for you. Ember is an extension of that, and we're always open to feedback. One thing that I want to just mention before we get to questions is some people ask, like, is there anything that you can do to help? I think honestly, the biggest thing is just share this if you find it helpful, right? So if you think that you learned something here, just post about it on LinkedIn, tag us. I love when people tag us on LinkedIn. I love, resharing that or commenting on those to like increase your distribution. And not just that, but like if you have like a Medium article or a blog post, whether it's related to tech career growth or not, just share it with us. That's the kind of thing that when I see people in the community do good things, that makes me so happy. So any kind of content or any kind of posts that you make, just please do tag us. Would love to be involved.
Yeah, pretty much second everything, all the words of appreciation that Rahul has said. So kind of the mission of Tech Career Growth Community, this community we're building here, is to, lower barriers in tech for all without a paywall in sight. And, that's to us, that's sacred. Like we don't want to make money off this. I think that really kind of cheapens the experience here. We want to give this all away for free. And while actually giving extremely high quality content that we spend a lot of time working on. Like these sessions take us a lot of time to prepare. Like, yeah, we kind of go through the content like an hour, 15 minutes, but we spend like dozens of hours like putting this together. Because again, we don't want this to just be kind of like very simple, basic, like clickbait LinkedIn advice. So we actually want to give in-depth advice that is actionable and also respects all the nuances that come into play with all this complicated stuff in tech. But anyways, so it's free when it comes to money, but it's actually not free overall, because in order for you to kind of consume this content, you have to invest your time with us. And well, I don't know about Rahul, but for me, I actually consider time to be more valuable than money. I consider time to be the most valuable resource.
Yeah.
So the fact that so many hundreds of you have decided to invest so much of your time with us, that really warms our hearts, and it's incredible. It's like these sessions are the highlight of my week, of my month. It's amazing that you guys decided to invest your time with us, and we truly appreciate that. And we hold ourselves to a really high sense of duty here. Like we really hope we paid some good dividends on your investment. If you felt like we didn't and you think we could have better content or get more to the point, please let us know. As mentioned before, feedback is a gift. But yeah, thank you so much to all of you investing these like hundreds to thousands of hours with us. Like we really hope that we can help out.
Yes. Okay. And then, so last thing, I know we're diving this out. Last thing before I get to Raj, let me tell you one thing you should not do. I have on YouTube, there's this thing called membership, which I just turned on recently. And the idea of membership is that you like pay, I think on mine, it's like $5 a month to support the creator. Please don't do that. The reason I turned that on is I had some coworkers and some family members who said, hey, like what you're doing is cool. Like, is there an easy way I can help? And I said, hey, let me turn on memberships. But if you're part of the community, like, please don't do that. Alex and I are not in this to make money with the community. So please don't do that. All right, let's do this. Raj, you should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, so can we, help in building the Ember app?
That is a great question. I'll give you my perspective, Alex. You can tell me what you think. So right now, because we're so early, Alex and I have just been heads down working on it. And I think the issue is that if we start bringing in other people, ramping people up on like developing the platform itself, that might actually lead to more communication overhead. So I think right now, I don't think we're in a spot where the platform itself can be developed. But what we would love, Praj, or for other people who are interested, if you try it out and you let us know, like, here's what I really would love to see in terms of a developer portfolio that I can showcase to the world. All of that feedback would be enormously valuable. And eventually, once we get bigger, we're open to revisiting that.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one more suggestion: can we have the Ember project open source so that all of us can make a pull request when we are building a feature, and then you just have to test it out and deploy it if you find it good enough?
Yeah, so I've actually thought about that. I think one of the things that I had a couple of friends who have done that kind of route where they have a product and they turn it open source. And one of the issues with turning something open source, that there is some maintenance burden and some communication burden when you put something open source. And so I think right now, going back to the same reason of like, we just want to be heads down, high velocity and being able to respond to changes. We're not open source right now on Ember, but at some point, we'll have that dialogue ongoing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I second what Rahul says here. It's interesting. Like it's crazy. It's a good problem to have for sure. But we have a lot of folks who ask us to help out and become very directly integrated with this community. We actually have an example. We're working with this amazing guy within the community. His name is Addy. He's like helping us put together some of the content for tech career growth, and it's great because he's able to do stuff for the community. But formally onboarding something like that also takes time. So, which is why we haven't really kind of expanded past Addy to get on to kind of onboard more folks into directly helping us, because yeah, even though they're giving us their time, which is amazing, it also takes some of Rahul and I's time to use that time. So it makes it really tricky given how strapped for time we are. One of the reasons, like I think one of the core reasons what makes this community beautiful and why we're able to do this for free is Rahul and I actually work full-time day jobs. We do this on the side. So since we're already making, a pretty decent money just working at our big tech jobs in Silicon Valley, we don't really need for this community to make money for us. We just do it purely for the spirit and to help people out. And I think that purity makes this community really awesome. But this also means that we have very, very little time, like free time. So this unfortunately leads to a lot of kind of very tough choices to make. But yeah, I think when it comes to Ember, personally, I would love to make a lot of the code open source just as a read-only resource, because there's a lot of at least on Android, there's a lot of components I built I think other people could use. But in terms of actually onboarding other contributors, that's pretty difficult just because it takes time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Raj, for the question and the interest. I'll go to Marcel now.
Thanks, Alex and Rahul. So my question is that I've read that Alex article about so we can start from a local utility offline apps. And I understand that for Android apps, you can have installs and ratings as the metrics. But if I build a local utility on the web app, what kind of metrics can be useful, can be meaningful, because there is no user installs?
Okay. Yeah, great question. That's a great question. I'll get this, even though I kind of cheated and also answered the previous question. I think it's like my turn to answer this one. But if you're building a local utility app on web, and just for kind of context here, the local utility app is essentially a very, very basic app that doesn't require a backend, doesn't require accounts. It's essentially like it does something very basic, which is what a lot of my apps do. So imagine like an app that rolls dice, that's a local utility app. But going back to the question of on web, how do you measure the impact of a local utility app? Number one, the users are still important. And unfortunately, I think you have to do a bit of extra work for this. But I don't think not too much work. I personally recommend Google/Firebase Analytics. I don't know how Google is branding it now. But Google Firebase Analytics gives you a lot of stuff for free. I think the users, it comes out of the box for free. You just have to add the SDK. So that will get users, and it probably does some IP address deduping as well to get unique users. Still get your number of users. That's probably the most important one. Number two, when it comes to local utility apps, I would also add something called a number of core interactions. So let's say that you build an app, like a really nice dice roller app, right? Like the point of the app is or the web app is to roll dice, right? So how do you measure that? Is how many times have people used this app to roll dice? So if you build this really slick dice rolling app and people have rolled dice with it like a million times, and that's super impressive. Like you can drop that on your resume and take it to the bank, right? Like an app that's essentially performed that useful duty that it's meant to do a million times. That's incredible. And yeah, that logging you'll probably have to do yourself, but I think you can do it with Firebase Analytics. It's logging in an event there is really easy, and it's just a quantity thing. You just have to figure out amount over time, so it's pretty easy. So yeah, like TLDR, users, number of users, and number of core interactions are, I think, the two metrics, like the most important metrics in my opinion. You can add more to that if you want, but that's just gravy. I think those two are enough if they have high numbers to impress a recruiter. And number two, the Google stuff, like Google Analytics, Firebase Analytics, is super good. Highly recommend. Yeah, thanks for the question.
All right, Marnie.
Hi, good morning. I just graduated from a boot camp and I don't have any real work experience in tech. I was just wondering, what advice do you have for showcasing non-tech work experience in your resume?
I love that question. So Marnie, you're saying that prior to the bootcamp, you worked in another industry. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So this is something that we get a lot. And I think describing your non-computer science or non-software engineering experience is 100% valuable and in many ways relevant to landing a software engineering job, assuming that's what you want. So I think the key thing here is that you should take the experience that you had. For example, I'll make this more concrete. There was one person in the Slack community who posted that he worked in hotel management. He went into a boot camp and now he was attempting to find a job as a software engineer. And that's great because being a manager of a hotel, there are guaranteed many, many characteristics of a successful hotel manager, which will carry over directly into software management. Things like organization and being detail oriented. And so I think focusing on those characteristics which do translate over is key. And also, I would say a lot of the advice that Alex and I talked about will apply directly to that. So things like show, don't tell. So if you are a hotel manager, talk about what delta did you make in terms of lowering costs or increasing revenue or whatever way you measure success as a hotel manager. Talk about those in the same way that make it clear that you were really exceptional at that. Because the thing that happens is that if you're good at one job and you work hard, you're going to become good and you're going to work hard on any other job too. Like those are very horizontally applicable. And so I would say those are the two things. One is focus on the skills that you think will transfer over into tech. And second, a lot of the advice that we have, like show, don't tell, and being really quantifiable in terms of your impact, a lot of those will apply. Thanks for the question. All right, Shubham.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Rahul. I had a similar question along those lines. That what if we have extracurricular and co-curricular activities or stuff in volunteering and social activities? Should we put that in our resume or should we let it pass?
Okay, so my internet cut out. It's funny because I live in Silicon Valley, which is like kind of the core internet place, but my internet connection is really bad because Comcast sucks. So I think the question was, if you have extracurriculars, do you put that in your resume?
Yeah.
Rahul, am I correct? Or
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So that's a good question. Short answer, no, unless it's like truly exceptional. I think extracurriculars, and this is kind of a broader piece of feedback I've given a lot, is that a lot of the stuff that gets you through school, like how to get into a good college and how to succeed in college, doesn't translate over to the job world. And I think extracurriculars are one of these things. Like extracurriculars are, at least in the US, are great for a college application, like almost required if you want to get into like one of these really elite colleges like Harvard, Stanford, etc. But when it comes to like applying for a job, like in writing a resume, you want to communicate, signal around like, adding business impact. So, and frankly, a lot of extracurriculars don't really translate to that. Like, let's say you were on the varsity basketball team. It doesn't really give any signal to me really that like you're a good software engineer or whatever other tech profession, like you're a designer or like you're a technical program manager or something. So kind of my advice here is, if it's like, again, something really exceptional, like let's say, you organize like some charity event that, raised like $1 million, then yeah, by all means, drop that there. And then I think the sheer kind of magnificence of that will, show some transferable skills there. But if it's just like kind of your, I guess, more regular extracurricular activities, like things that, a lot of other people probably have, like you play piano or play badminton or something, even if you're like pretty good, I would probably leave that out. Of course, if you don't have anything else to put, yeah, try to fill up that one page. When we say one page, it means exactly one page. Like having half a page would be pretty bad. So sometimes you do need filler content, especially if you're early on. But as soon as you get enough like kind of dope projects and work experience, you don't really need the extracurriculars at that point. And Signal communicates is rather minimal.
All right, how about Gene? All right, Gene, you should be able to unmute now. Okay, while we wait for Gene to figure that out, let's go on to Nanda.
Hello. Okay. Am I audible?
Yep, we can hear you.
I'm doing my UG course at Electrical. Whether if I start with web development, which will be suitable for me for beginner level.
Sorry, can you say that last part one more time? What I heard is you're doing web development and you're saying something about what is more beginner friendly.
Web development. If I start with web development, what?
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is if you're starting with web development, like what are some good places to start? And so I think that honestly, there's not a right answer here. This question comes up a lot, so I think it is actually relevant to many people, I think, which is, okay, I'm starting out and I want to be able to ship something, I want to be able to build something. What do I build? What technology do I use? And I think that the answer is it doesn't really matter that much. Pick what you think you will like, and that might be hard if you don't really have any experience in the software industry. So then the second criteria is pick what you think will be easy to learn. So for example, if you're doing web, I think React, there's so much content online in terms of tutorials and information about how to get started up and running with React. And the benefit of using something popular like React is that things are very easily Googleable. So if you get stuck, almost certainly there's going to be some Stack Overflow which will help you with that. And the third criteria I'll pick, or I'll mention, is that I think if you have a friend or a coworker or someone who you think is actually quite good in that technology, that is 100% a good reason to pick that. Like the reason I got into Android, I tell the story a lot, is that there was someone at Pinterest when I joined who was exceptional at Android. And it was very clear to me that he could help me. And I just leveraged that. I leveraged him quite a bit. And that was like a really good way for me to get up and running and get, help, immediate help, much faster than if I was doing it on my own. So those are kind of the three ways I would consider that. All right. Akshay?
Yeah. Hi, Rahul. Am I audible?
Yep, I can hear you.
Actually, I'm presently undergoing my post-graduation, and I was making one project in which I have made some significant contributions using Spring Boot and MongoDB in the backend. And I just want to know, like, how can I showcase those backend skills in my resume? Like, how can I showcase that project in my resume and in a very good way so that it really shows that I have worked on it?
Yeah, good question. I think I allude to a lot of the advice from before. Like when it comes to any contribution, right? This is like also applicable to backend folks, people who don't work on something that's further away from the user, like away from pixels on screen. Is the scale of the project you're working on is, I think, very valuable. As mentioned before, like there's a huge difference between working on a website or an app or service with 50 users versus 500,000. So put down the scale. And as shown in the example before, Delta, like if you added some new backend components or you changed the DB like from like non-Mongo to Mongo, or you just added a DB to begin with, try to illustrate the impact. Did it get more users? Did it increase like the score of user feedback? Did it reduce bugs and kind of area like single points of failure, stuff like that? That's pretty much the advice I have there. Like backend is a bit trickier because you can't attach a nice demo, but like all the kind of rules around showing versus telling still apply.
Yeah. I think also just focus on the impact that you're having more than the technology. I think it's great to focus on that. But like on Ember, we want to highlight people, the projects that we're going to share with our friends and recruiters who we know. are going to be projects that we think have like 1,000 users or 10,000 users. So like, it's great to highlight your skill set in front end and back end, but like really, I think the thing you should care the most about is acquiring users. All right, Dylan. All right, are you there, Dylan? All right, so why don't we go on to Trin while Dylan figures that out.
Hello.
Yeah, hey.
Hi, thanks for hosting this. This has been really great. Alex omitted his LinkedIn page on his resume, and I wanted to find out why you decided to leave it off. And that's something that I'm struggling with is I have over 20 years of experience, and I was able to get it down to one page, but then I struggle with, do I leave my LinkedIn, address on the resume? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Alex, do you want to take that? Because it sounds like it's about your resume.
Oh yeah, right. The answer to this one is actually pretty simple. I forgot. I actually think that LinkedIn is a great resource to put on your resume. I just forgot. You should totally do it. Yeah, because resume is effectively LinkedIn is effectively resume plus in my opinion. So the way I see resumes is like a resume should stand on its own. But if the recruiter or engineer, whoever's reading your resume, like really vibes with his resume and thinks it's great, like you should give them the avenues to dig deeper, right? So it's like, okay, you have this like 30 seconds, like 10 to 30 seconds worth of content on the resume. But if I want to go deeper into what they've done and I want to see even more stuff, like, demos and of course, like more additional like project and work experience in depth, then yeah, give them the opportunity to do that. And I think LinkedIn is an amazing way to do that. Yeah, it's like if they really want to go deep on your profile, they can, like on your portfolio, they can go to your LinkedIn and it has all the stuff neatly formatted. LinkedIn is an amazing tool, as we all know. So yeah, I'm surprised my most recent one doesn't have the LinkedIn profile. That's a mistake on my part.
and I'm hoping eventually, once we get to that point, Ember will also be on many people's resume to really highlight, your actual personal software. LinkedIn is much more horizontal. But thanks for the question, Trin. All right, Jonah.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Once again, thank you guys for the talk. It's been very wonderful. So yeah, my question involved, when it comes to learning technologies and, sort of implementing them into your previous projects, it seems as if there's a standard to learn quite a bit of project, or rather learn quite a bit of technologies, but at the same time, be specialized, right? So have a lot of really, really broad technologies, but then also be specialized. So what are your comments on that in terms of how to learn best? Would you rather, specialize, get really good at one of those technologies and then have that knowledge sort of branch off in other ones, or would you rather sort of split things more evenly?
Yeah.
I know you had talked in the past about Android, you just put that on your resume and nothing else, but any comments about that, I suppose?
Yeah, I love that. And actually, this is perfect because Alex and I, we've actually talked about this in the past with each other and with some community members. So short answer is focus on depth over breadth, especially if you're like having a hard time, getting that first job. I think that depth over breadth is certainly more important. And in fact, there's a video on my channel where I think Alex and I, it was like a segment of a previous session where we talk about exactly this. So I think the reasoning behind it is that in order to really be able to dive into a code base and understand the different abstractions and figure out how to actually change it to have business value, you need some level of depth. And that is, I think, what is lacking from many people who are graduating from university or from a boot camp, is that they, at a very high level, they understand, okay, here's how I can do something with React or Angular or some Android component, but they are missing that depth of understanding to be able to go into a code base and make a surgical change to fix a bug, right? And so I think that having that depth is much more important. And when you become more senior and you're like starting to lead a team and you're working with other teams in the company, that's where I think breadth becomes more important, because you have to be able to speak the language of other engineers. You have to be able to look at another code base and quickly assess, like what's going on. But I think the short answer is depth over breadth. And I'll actually link that YouTube video in the Zoom chat and the YouTube chat as soon as I get a minute. But thanks for the question. Okay, Lokesh.
Hello, Am I audible?
Yep.
First of all, thank you for this amazing session. So my question is, I am an final year electronics engineering student from India. I have watched a series named Silicon Valley, and I'm inspired by that series. So my dream is to get a software engineer job at Silicon Valley. Is it possible to get a job immediately after college, or should I work for 2 years, or should I do my MS in US if I want to get a job at a US office? Is it possible to just after finishing my UGA in India, can I apply to jobs at US? For example, can I apply to Facebook software engineer role at US?
Yeah. So Alex, do you want to take? I have some personal experience from people coming from India in particular, but Alex, if you want to go for it, you can take it.
I think I answered 2 questions in a row. So yeah, and I think you can answer this like the same or better than I do. I'll just drop a link in the Slack in the meantime as you answer this.
Okay, cool. So I think the answer is that it's definitely possible. I know people who are coming directly from undergrad in India and they land a job at Facebook, Microsoft, Google. I think it's harder though. It's much harder than the route that many people take, which is they apply for a master's degree and come to the US and spend 2 years there and then get a job after that. And one big reason is because of the visa issue. Like the quota for these companies to hire foreign, like international people is actually much smaller, and they're going to use up the most of that quota on more senior people. And so that's why I think that coming to the US for a master's is a great option, because then you get OPT, right? You get this ability to do internships at companies, and you can convert that into a full-time opportunity. I think that if you are intent on making the transition directly, there's a couple things that you need to do in order to stand out. One is what we've talked about again and again, which is personal projects. If you have a personal project like an Android app or iOS app or something which has a meaningful number of users, like let's say 100,000 or 500,000 people using your app, that becomes really impressive. And I will put your resume on a different pile to say this person is exceptional. Let's hire them directly, or let's at least interview them, right? Another opportunity is open source. So I think being able to have like a meaningful open source contribution is another big thing. And then finally, competitive programming. I think that somehow seems to be quite big in India, much bigger than my background in Silicon Valley and growing up in the US. I never really was in the circle that really focused on competitive programming. But I think if you're really exceptional at that, and when I say exceptional, I mean like top 0.5%, then you could maybe get noticed and get the opportunity directly. Otherwise, I would say that best option is probably just do a master's in the US if that's your goal. All right, Joshua.
My question is this: with all things relevant and the current job market is a candidate-driven market, would you suggest that candidates tailor their resume to any specific position that they're seeking?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I've gotten it before. We've gotten it before, and there's a lot of, I think, bad advice about it, in my opinion. So when it comes to resume customization, especially as a junior developer, I strongly recommend against doing it. Like, especially if you're doing it on the level of you're customizing it for every job position, then that's ridiculous. That's going to take so much time. And when it comes to applying to positions as a junior developer, it's really about quantity over quality. So I wrote an article about this. I can share it later. But the approach as a junior developer, which I've used and I've helped many other people use, including like my own little brother and close friends and family, is of course you get the resume as good as you can. Because that's a essentially multiplicative resource, because you send your one resume to many different jobs. But then aside from that, really don't do much work on the customization front, because it's there's so much, frankly, kind of BS with like the job searching process that like investing more than like, I would say 20-30 minutes and definitely not over an hour into any one job posting is just too treacherous. Because like sometimes you'll spend all this time making a really awesome custom resume and application, and then the position just gets filled up. Like you just applied when they already had a candidate in the pipeline and they were like 90% done hiring this other person, and then you just kind of got unlucky, right? So you essentially just want to cast a really wide net when it comes to applying to jobs, and this applies to your resume as well. There is some room for kind of nuance here. I think it might be worth customizing your resume like a bit, but like not too much, for like really small mission-driven startups, because at that, for these companies, like kind of the passion and like the fit is like much more important. Like they want something that's much more specific, because every hire means a lot more. But like I wouldn't customize your resume. Like if you're applying to Google and Facebook and Snapchat, et cetera, like these really big companies that are, I mean, frankly, kind of these well-oiled, almost like soulless corporations, but very efficient and, you know, amazing companies, obviously. Like the customization is just a waste of time. And a question like I would ask is like, if you have to heavily customize your resume in order to feel like you have a chance to get the job, you know, is the problem like you're not customizing the resume enough, or is that your core skills are not enough? Like for me, I only have one resume that I use everywhere. And I firmly believe in it because my core skills are really good. Because like core skills are multiplicative, right? Like if I build like, you know, a really good Android app, I can apply to every Android position and then cite that consistently. But then, you know, if I don't have that much like kind of content and core skills and I have to customize in order to like really resume stand out, that's not scalable. And I think that's getting away from kind of the, you know, what it means to be a really strong like candidate, which is you have really good core skills that are applicable like anywhere. Yeah. And then I've also seen some folks who are like in two stacks at once. Like they're both good at, like, they're both like decent at like iOS and web or something. And then they have like an iOS resume and a web resume. And my advice there is like, why are you ambivalent on like what field you're choosing? Like it's especially when you're early on, it's much more optimal to pick one thing. So it's like, do you really like iOS and web like completely 50-50, or is there, you're just doing it just to get more jobs? And if you're doing it just to get more jobs opportunities, I don't think that's the way to go. I think you should just pick one or the other and just go deep on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thanks for it.
Hi, Animesh.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So, actually, my question was already just asked previously. I also was asking about, I also wanted to ask about customization and, tweaking, because again, different jobs have different requirements. And, while I was back in school, I was kind of routed towards more towards AI and machine learning. But then, currently I'm a software engineer, and I kind of have two different resumes because I think both the fields are different. But yeah, I mean, so the central question was, do you want to, tweak your resume and with the application tracking system in place, just would you want to kind of, put in the words which the job description mentions, or like would you have a one size fits all approach to applications?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for the most part, my answer is that I wouldn't waste time customizing. It's not a very high leverage activity. Like if you feel like you're getting getting interviews, then I feel like just stick with one really solid resume and then send that out. But if you really feel like you're not getting anything, then I think that's where maybe it might make sense to customize if the job listings themselves are quite distinct and you feel like you may need to tailor something about it. Let me take this in another direction as well, which is cover letter. Cover letter is certainly something where you can and should customize it for the company. I don't know if those are commonly like in the job that you're applying for, but like some quick tidbits of advice on cover letter: talk about the company first and then yourself second. Make sure that it's sincere and passionate for that company. Like you're not just using some buzzword jargon. And then you also want to make sure that it's high energy. A lot of the people who are reading cover letters, they want to see why you want to work there in particular. So that could be something in terms of the customization that you could go deep on. But for resumes in general, like Alex mentioned, I would say that stick with a canonical template or canonical format, and then just send that out to everywhere.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. All right, Maxwell.
Hey guys, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. First of all, Alex and Rahul, thank you guys so much for this lovely session, and thank you so much for the the app that you guys built. I think that's wonderful. Speaking of resumes, you guys can actually put that on your own resume. So I just wanted to say thank you guys for that. A little bit of what I got from you guys today, I guess, what you guys are essentially saying, for some of us who are junior developers and are getting rejected because of the years of experience, can you guys say that that's attributed to maybe the content that we have on our resumes? Maybe it needs to be tweaked, and that will like percolate some of the eyes of the recruiter. Especially for some of us who probably don't even know, like me, myself, I don't know how to ship code to, I've never done like a code to Android or anything like that. Like I realize that that's something that I would love to learn very quickly, but also take my time to master that. I don't know how to like make an app and put it on for everyone to play with, but or do a review or rating. But I think what you guys are basically telling us, that we could also tweak the content of our resumes to make it more business impactful. Is that true or not?
Yeah. To answer the question, like at a high level, that it is true. I think that's a big point of this session, is the presentation is really important. Like, and we talked about this like in optimizing for promotion as well. A lot of folks have actually done amazing work that are like that's more than enough to get them promoted or to get them a job, but they're actually not representing it properly. So I think that's kind of, when it comes to searching for jobs, there are many different levers you can pull to see more success searching for a job. And that's kind of one way to view kind of what Rahul and I are doing in this community. Like, it's not our goal to to kind of boss you around and micromanage you and tell you exactly what to do. I see our goal is like, we go through all the different levers that you have access to at any point in your career, whether it's like getting promoted or finding your first job or passing a big tech interview. We go through all the different levers you can invest in and pull to varying degrees, and describe how those levers work and like when to use them. And then in terms of like how you use the levers, that's up to you. So I think one of the most important levers is like optimizing your resume. So I would make a first pass, like, well, probably multiple passes, like through the resume, and be like, is this like accurately catching, is this accurately, essentially just claiming credit for all the awesome stuff I've done, right? So like a lot of folks are a bit hesitant to kind of claim credit and brag. But when it comes to like something like an interview or a resume or representing yourself in promotion, like you want to brag. That's the time to brag. Of course, there's a limit to that. Don't just be super cocky and annoying, but like you should definitely be, exude confidence and claim credit for the impact that you've gotten. So that's kind of the first layer of like, if you're trying to debug why you're not able to find jobs, then maybe you're not claiming enough credit for the awesome stuff on your resume. But then of course, a lot of the times it's a content problem. Like you don't have much things to claim credit for because you're a very junior engineer. That's, of course, that's completely normal. In that scenario, there's a couple more leverage you can pull, right? Like if you're getting rejected because of not enough experience, which happens all the time, there's kind of there's two main ways to deal with this. Number one, just apply to more places. There are places that are more kind of willing to give opportunities to very junior developers, even if you don't have work experience. If you apply to more places, mathematically you'll discover more of those places. That's one way to go about it. The second one is, of course, you create your own work experience, as we talked about before. Like if they're going like you don't have enough experience, and then you learn to build some software on your own, which you can pretty easily do nowadays, and you just go like, okay, I come back here, I have an app with like 5K downloads. Like, I mean, that's more or less experience, right? Like they would be stupid to turn you away, especially if you're like a junior developer and you're able to do that all on your own. That's incredible.
So numbers do matter then at the end of the day. Like
numbers definitely matter. Yeah.
Okay, because I see that you have awesome numbers on your resume yourself, or just as an example. So I'm seeing things that we can add to our resumes, such as creating an app and putting it on Google Play. And then creating numbers with that.
Yep. Yeah. I think software in general is a very pragmatic, practical industry, which is probably why these like big tech companies are so successful. Facebook is notoriously metrics driven, too much so, but I think the overall spirit is correct. So yeah, numbers are super, super important. If you can throw a number in there, because I think that's just how humans understand scales, like having a number. If you can throw a number in there to really illustrate like your scale and your scope and your impact, and that helps a lot. Yeah, you should totally do it.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah,
thank
you. You guys are heaven sent too, by the way. Thank you.
That means a lot. Thanks, Max. I think just to underscore one point there is like numbers 100% matter. And I think the reason is because I think Alex brought this up either earlier in this session or maybe in a previous session, which is that anyone can follow a React tutorial, right? Like all it takes is reading comprehension and being able to copy paste code from a tutorial or Stack Overflow, and anyone can be able to like build a clone of the Twitter app or the clone of an Instagram app in React. So that itself is not impressive, actually. Like, I think it's good to do that and you're going to learn a lot. But what is impressive in order to get a job is numbers. Like, if you can tell me that you have something with 5K downloads, that becomes impressive because you're actually clearly adding value to people because that metric proves it. So yeah, 100% agree with what Alex said. All right. Jetty, I guess. Can you say your name and then ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me, guys?
Yep.
First of all, thank you very much for doing this because it's so much value. There's so much value in this. So thank you very much. And the question would be, basically, I'm trying to apply for jobs, as probably most people here, and I'm kind of struggling of what the purpose of the cover letter is, more or less. Like, what would you have any tips on? Like, what exactly do you really put in? Like, because I think it's very thin line between not sounding too kind of desperate for the job sometimes, because when you're applying for many jobs, like, what's the kind of sweet spot for cover letters? What do you think?
Yeah, totally. And can you say your name for me?
Gediminas. Get us for short.
Got it. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure I start to recognize people's names. Thanks for the question. So I think that, yeah, what are people looking for in cover letters? I think it's a great question. Let me say a meta point first, which is that I think when I was in university, maybe I was lucky, or, you know, I had the privilege of, you know, I had this career fair come to Stanford and I was able to like hand my resume directly to people. So I was lucky. I definitely have some privilege, but I think one meta point I'll say is that a lot of the opportunity, almost all the opportunities I got, I didn't have to even submit a cover letter. And there's different degrees to this. Like some companies will actually say, hey, do this 8-hour take-home challenge and then come back to us. And then some companies, like the ones you're talking about, are like, to submit a cover letter and a resume. And then some companies, which are the simplest, they're like, submit a resume. And like, honestly, I think this place you should spend most of your time is in that latter category, which is all you do is submit a resume, because that will give you the most throughput. And like Alex mentioned, it's a numbers game. You're going to be able to find companies that will take a bet on you, which will give you an opportunity and get you an interview. And once you're in the interview stage, that's where you can really show much more of who you are. And you can do like the DSA prep and all that comes with interviews. But if you are focused on that second category of you need to have a cover letter, I think that the purpose of the cover letter is basically to, like, my impression of it is that it's a way to introduce friction to prevent drive-by applicants. So the company is kind of forcing you to do this extra legwork to make sure that, you know, you actually care. And so I think that there's not a secret here. I think what you should do is talk about the company first. So make it obvious that you're making this cover letter for that company. Talk about their business or talk about a product they launched. Then you talk about your background and why is your background applicable to that company in particular. And one big characteristic that I've seen in the companies I've looked at when they look at cover letters is they want to make sure it's well written and high energy. A lot of times there's an ulterior motive. I don't want to say ulterior, but like there's another motive to a cover letter, which is, does this person communicate effectively? Because a lot of people are able to write code, but when you have them write a paragraph or, you know, you get them in an interview, like it's very hard to understand what they're saying. So I think another part of a cover letter is like, can you put a paragraph together? Can you put like a high energy? Can you communicate high energy, passion, dedication in writing? And then that's like another skill that people are sometimes assessing. I think the other thing, like to your point about like desperation, I don't know if I have like a silver bullet to like prevent that, but I think like try and just be sincere and passionate. I think the best way to gauge that is get feedback. So if you're open to it, you can share your cover letter in Slack or just message Alex or I, we can try and take a look, but those are the tactics I would share.
Cool, thank you very much. It's insane that this is free, honestly. Thank you very much.
Awesome, yeah, thanks for the question. All right, Danny.
Hi guys, thank you so much for the session. I have a one quick question. One quick comment and like 2 half questions. Comment is that I just joined Slack channel, but there's no channel called Resume Review, which I heard on YouTube. So I was wondering if you could point me to the right channel, how to find it.
Yeah, I can quickly answer that. It's called Resume Review and Sharing. I can, yeah, resume dash sharing dash and review and reviews. So
Okay.
if you don't see it, just message me directly on LinkedIn. I'll link it to you.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
There's also a search bar in Slack, which is pretty nice.
Okay, I'll look for it. And my question is, so the first one is related to my resume length for someone who transitioned into tech kind of mid-career. Is the ideal length still 1 page, or should I try to go over, or is that not important? Just to give you a bit of a depth to that, I'm a bit on the older side. I have about 10 years of work experience in a non-tech industry. And I switched over, did a boot camp 3 years ago. And through a miracle, I found a job at a top tier agency, currently working a contract at Apple. So that's the only genuine part. But I'm trying to get an interview for an actual job at big tech. Still have a hard time. Yesterday, I got a referral from someone inside LinkedIn. HR declined me the same day without even a screen call. So I feel like my resume is pretty weak. So I'm wondering if length is a concern for me at this stage. And the other question is, if I had a chance to consider joining a Y Combinator company as a founder, is that something that may help me transition into big tech in the long run?
I think it's my turn to answer the question. Number one, it should still be 1 page. Even though you have a lot of experience, a lot of it is outside of tech, and your goal is essentially to minimize the non-directly applicable portion over time. I don't think if you added another page, it would help you, because if your first page is not strong enough to really get yourself into the process, then it's not likely the second one will. And if the second one does get you into the process, then why is your second page better than your first? Which, yeah, that is a bit confusing to me. I'm going on to the Y Combinator founder thing. It could help. Yeah, obviously, if you go to a Y Com startup and it's successful, well, at that point, I actually don't even think it's worth going to big tech, because that's amazing. I think it's way more fun to be a successful founder than to just be another cog in the machine. Admittedly, it's a great machine, like working for a company like Facebook or Google, but you still have a cog in the machine. But yeah, like if you are a successful like Y Com founder, I'm sure you can write your ticket into more or less any big tech company. I've seen some folks do that, like they're a successful founder, but it's not like massive scale. Like maybe they're acquired for like like $50-100 million, which is of course amazing. But then the journey ends there after acquisition. I've seen a lot of folks like that, like senior engineers at Facebook who even at Y Com startups, they were early employees, and then it got acquired, and then they're like, well, let's go somewhere more stable. I've seen that happen. But of course, there's a huge risk being like joining a very early stage startup, whether you're a founder or an early employee, like these kind of like 5-person or less startups, the chance of failure is extremely high, right? It's something like 98-99% of startups fail, especially at such early stages. So yeah,
if it does fail, is it bad PR for you?
It depends on how it fails. I think if you like didn't fail for some like crazy reason, like there are some startups that flame out because they're really poorly managed. In that case, it's bad. But if it just failed for the usual reason of like not good product market fit, which happens all the time, I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think Silicon Valley is very tolerant of failure, so I wouldn't worry about like a black mark on your resume or on your history. Like I think it's 100% fine to give a go at something and fail. And one other thing I'll just quickly mention here is that I think that just be clear about what you want, Danny. Like if your goal is to become a really good software engineer, I actually don't think that being a YC founder is going to help you with that. Like I have a ton of friends who have gone through YC and they've all said great things. But the thing to keep in mind is that if you're a YC founder, the biggest problem will almost certainly not be the technology or the code. The biggest problem is almost certainly going to be what product do you build? How do you talk to customers? How do you get feedback, right? So like, I think that it's 100% a good path to go down, and that'd be super exciting. But like, I don't know necessarily if that will turn you into an amazing engineer.
All right, great, thank you.
Thanks. All right, Alex.
Oh, hey, there's another Alex.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So while I think Alex, you should be able to unmute, but while you're figuring that out, why don't we go on again to?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks for the session. It's awesome, and so many great tips you've provided. And I draw a lot of the previous questions already, and one thing what is left is now where to put this site experience on my CV and how to, yeah. You talked about the numbers that we can put it in the numbers, but yeah, currently I got not that numbers, and well, I'm appreciate this session when you show how to get to these numbers.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely next session, the whole session is gonna be focused on Alex's experience and partly my experience too, but Alex is the expert on like how to grow your app into getting those users. But what's the question, Alex, that you have right now?
Where to put the site experiences in a CV.
Got you. Yeah. Where to put on your resume or CV. Yeah. So I think that the short answer is you should, if you have professional work experience, which is applicable to the job that you're applying for, that should definitely go on top because that's the most directly relevant to what you're applying for. Below that, then you should put your personal projects. And then again, the same tactics apply where you really want to show and not tell. So have the numbers there and show like what you've done or what delta you've made along with technology. And then below that, then you can put your education. And I think Alex's resume is a really good template to follow. So you can take a look at that on Slack.
Mm-hmm. So don't to follow on like a timeline or something like that, just on the relevance, so to say.
Yeah, I think that putting like I think what your question is then is like if you have a personal project and that like intersects with some work experience, should you put it chronologically or just put it by category? I think 100% you should put it by category. So put your work experience first, and then put below that your personal projects. And Alex does a really good job of this on his template resume that you can model.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks. And one meta point before we go to Marcel again. We have 15 hands raised. So I think at this point, we'll try and go through as many of these as possible. And then the last person I see is Hamza. So at that point, I think we will call it. And anything we don't take after that, like if you have a question after that, then please ask us on Slack.
Yeah, I think we can stay on for 15, 20 minutes tops. We've been on the call for 3 hours now, and it's like lunchtime in California. So let's see how many we can get through in the next, let's say 20 minutes to make it a clean kind of noon finish, at least for me in California. And then, yeah, if we can't make it to your question, please just ask it on Slack. Yeah, and there's the thing about Slack is there's like 3,800 awesome, 4,000 now, like other amazing people who can also help answer your questions. So
nice. We crossed 4,000. Amazing. All right, Marcel.
Thanks for taking my question again. I just like to quickly ask about the point that was made. The education, we almost certainly never ship products, but so this question is more for Rahul. So if you can turn back time, would you still take that master's degree at Stanford?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I think that will depend very much on where you are. For me, I 100% would have. There are a couple of reasons for it. One, I'm just going to be transparent with all of you. I was not very good at data structures and algorithms for the first 2 or 3 years of undergrad. Like I failed so many interviews. And so I think getting that master's degree, like, let me give some background. I spent 5 years at Stanford because I was able to do a bachelor's and master's degree in that 5 years. I didn't like go off and work and then come back to a master's. And so I think the reason why the master's was 100% worthwhile for me is because it gave me 1 additional year to really do a lot of preparation on DSA, like data structures and algorithms, which really helped me get a bunch of really compelling job offers when I graduated. And at some point, Alex and I can talk about, like the negotiation and like things that happened after that. But like I was in a much better position after my, like during my co-term year is what we called it at Stanford. And the second reason why I think it was worth it for me was I was able to do research. Like one of the things about Stanford, like all of you know this, is that the faculty are amazing. And I think one of the things that I never did during my first 4 years of college, I really didn't interact with anyone on the faculty. And I just felt like, what a shame that I spent all this time, going to this institution and not like maybe like 3 faculty members know my name. That's how I felt. And so I feel like during my 5th year, I was able to actually get a research position where I was able to do a lot of in-depth research on like recommendation systems and machine learning. And that actually led to the startup opportunity that I ended up joining. So I feel like for that reason, it was 100% worth it. But I think that for many people, financially, it's not worth it at all. Like, I think that if I were able to like go directly into industry after undergrad, that probably financially would have been better off for me. But for the reasons I shared in terms of like being able to spend one more year preparing and the research, like the connection with faculty, those are the two reasons why it was worth it for me.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Thank you, Rahul.
Yeah, thanks. How about we go back to Dylan? I see Dylan raised his hand. Let's see if he can unmute now.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, awesome. I'm on Wayland. I have to configure this thing every time I try and chat with someone. So I was wondering, I'm just about to finish up a boot camp. And I've been looking at jobs, applying to a few, and so many entry-level positions, the standard is just 3 years experience for entry level that I've been seeing. So my question is, if you're like just trying to get through a recruiter and not even a developer so you can land an interview, how can you get around that 3-year barrier that they have as a requirement and make yourself look hireable without that? Or is it something that you kind of just fudge the numbers on just so you can get past the recruiter and up to a developer, or what's the strategy there?
Yeah, good question. So my first piece of advice here, which is kind of broad, is I think a big kind of aspect of this community is around openness and honesty, and I think that applies to kind of the advice we give as well. I think kind of like bending the numbers here and just essentially not being 100% honest will come back to bite you. Like there's framing your content optimally, and then there's essentially kind of making up content. I think the second one, you're probably going to get punished for it on the interview. And yeah, it sucks that a lot of these jobs, supposedly entry-level jobs, are like, you know, have 3 years of experience on the requirement, and then you apply and then turns out they actually respect it. It sucks. But I think like essentially trying to put 3 on your resume and just kind of oh yeah, I kind of like worked on projects for 3 years. That's pretty dangerous. And you might, and like it's you essentially don't want to burn any bridges, because if they find out in the interview that like this is not completely honest, then it can come back to bite you. First of all, your bridge with this company will be burned. But if this company has connections with other companies, like maybe it's part of a network of startups all work together, or it's a big company, you might get blacklisted from a bunch of other companies, which would be really, really bad. So my advice here is there's kind of 2. Number 1, you can get your own work experience, as mentioned before. Like you can build your own projects, and you can try to get, you can deploy them into production, get users, and essentially build your own product like a company would, but on your own. Of course, not as a big a scale, and your goal isn't to really make money, it's to get users. But it's pretty dang close to what you would do at a company. So that's, you know, that's one thing to do. That's what I did. The Course Hero Android lead position actually required 3+ years of professional Android experience. But at that point, I had already been building Android side projects for about 2.5 years, and I had multiple apps with over 10,000 users. So I was able to essentially like kind of meet that requirement in another way. So I'm proof that this works. Number 2, there are the solution to getting around these kind of BS job postings that are entry level and require like 3+ years of experience is just apply to more jobs and find those that don't have that requirement. Because there's like thousands upon thousands of jobs that you can apply to. One tool I recommend in particular is AngelList, angel.co. Man, there's so many Medium articles I need to share, but that's a really good platform for early stage startups in particular that are generally more lenient about experience, simply because startups are a lot scrappier and they don't have the funds to hire like a really established senior engineer. So they're more willing to take a bet on junior engineers. And I know a lot of boot campers who went to early stage startups for their first job. And then Rahul and I have talked about this before, but after you get the first job, everything changes. Everything becomes way easier. Like you can go to any company, you know, that is doing anything remotely legitimate. Once you get 1 or 2 years of experience there, it's way easier applying to jobs. It's just the problem is like, you know, people are not willing to take bets on folks with 0 experience. But once you just get 1 to 2 years of experience, then like I think like 85 to 90% of kind of that friction goes away. And yeah, kind of going back to the angel listings, look for startups. I think a lot of folks are averse to startups, myself included. Like my dream as a UCLA student, at least in the beginning, was to work for one of these big tech companies. I didn't realize that startups were so essentially this undiscovered amazing world. I think they get a bad rap because it's like, oh yeah, they're not big, so like they're not successful and I can't learn as much there. But that's completely untrue. I think startups are great for learning, even early stage ones. It's a different kind of learning, but experience is experience, and you can't really be too picky if you're a junior developer, frankly. And that was essentially the case for me, because I essentially accepted my PayPal offer to not do Android because I had to, because I did so many interviews. I got destroyed by like 98% of them. PayPal was pretty much the only legitimate offer I had. So that's why I went there.
Okay.
And also just real quick, Dylan, don't be deterred by these job listings which say we want 3 years of experience. Like Alex is proof, right? Like Course Hero was demanding 3 years of experience. Alex didn't have any Android experience at that point and he got the job, right? So I think a lot of these job listings are garbage. Like you should not listen at all to what the requirements are. Apply anyway. And if you have a referral, that's even better because then they can kind of vouch for you. But yeah, like I think just apply. Don't be deterred by like whatever the job listing might or might not say.
Yeah.
Okay.
So quick rule of thumb is subtract 2. And then if you meet that requirement, that's good. 3 is a bit of a stretch. Like I think for me, I'm a bit of an outlier because yeah, it was 3 years of experience, but I had a lot of successful side projects. But like if that's not the case, then subtract 2. So if it requires 1 or 2 years of experience and you have 0, like your bootcamp grad or something, I would apply. And yeah, because if you actually try to meet 100% of every job posting before you apply to it, you're just like not going to apply to anything as junior developer, and like you'll just not have a job forever. Yeah.
Right.
If you meet like 60-70% of the requirements and you're within that 2 years, that's I would just apply. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks. All right, Raghu.
Hi, Rahul. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, Rahul. So, thank you, Alex and Rahul, for organizing this session. So I have one question. Like I have 15 years of IT experience with one service-based company, one client, one project, different location, but different role. Like started as a engineer trainee, then I moved to project lead, then I became project manager, now senior project manager. So how do I put this into my resume? It might be some difference, like unique situation.
Right. So I think this is actually fairly common where you have like your whole career at one company or maybe at a consulting company where it's like quite distinct. So in those cases, you want to like the most impressive thing is that you were able to do all these functions and do them well at your company. So in that case, instead of having like, you should make a little bit of a tweak to what Alex presented in his resume, where like each company was one distinct thing. In your case, what you should do is actually have like the company and the title that you had, like project manager, and then below. Sorry,
go ahead. Sorry.
And then below that, you should have the company, the same company, but like a different title. And so you're basically dividing up the work that you've done across those 15 years into kind of more digestible bite-sized pieces that are more akin to like what Alex shows, where like he worked at a company for 2 or 3 years at a time. So that way, I think you'll be able to best demonstrate, your breadth of experience, and you can, like highlight your work, because the concern with having like one long, like section, which is 15 years, is that no one's going to read to the bottom of the bullet points that you have there. And so there's a risk of missing out on something. So a better way of framing it in my mind would be just to break that work down into like 3 or 4 year chunks and then put those on a couple different sections. Hopefully that helps. All right, Jonathan.
Oh wow, I didn't think you would get my question, but thanks guys for putting this on. My main question was for other areas in tech, like for example for cybersecurity. What kind of information would you suggest like you put on a resume, especially like for a fresh like college graduate or something, or someone like that?
Yeah, so the question is like what a very junior developer like a college graduate would put in the resume. I have a very good answer here because I actually shared my UCLA college student resume in the Slack community and on the LinkedIn page. So the order I would go in is the same: work experience, projects, education. But there is some nuance here. Number one, if you're a college student, there's a chance that you may not have any projects or work experience, in which case education would just kind of have to go to the top by default. And that would help if you go to a very prestigious university like Stanford. But I strongly believe that as soon as you get like, a good internship where you wrote code and you actually like learn to ship stuff to production, that should actually go above your education. And also if you're fortunate enough to have landed a pretty impactful side project as a student, like you got something with like 1, 5, 10K users, I would also put that in education. Essentially, education is kind of a last resort to put near the top. It's essentially just when you don't have any content. And then as soon as you get like relevant content, you move it down.
Awesome. Thanks for the question. How about Rakayam? Can you pronounce your name for us just so I make sure I say it correctly in the future?
Hello, how you guys doing?
Good.
Hi, how you doing, Alex and Rahul? I want to thank you guys for this session. It was very much appreciated. And I wanted to start off by asking, I'm checking in from New Jersey. I attend Rutgers University. And I wanted to ask you a quick question. How do you guys feel about student organizations? So I'm a part of a student organization that's for like my major, which is management information systems. And I would like to know, like, how do you feel that is transferable in terms of career?
Yeah, I love that. And can you pronounce your name for me just so
Rakim.
Rakim. Okay, thank you. So I think that student organizations are great from the perspective of networking. I think that like Rutgers is a great university. If it's anything like Stanford, like what would happen at Stanford is that I would be part of the IEEE or ACM organization. And what would happen is companies would directly come to those organizations and say, hey, we know that you're interested in this particular thing because you're obviously part of this club and we want to hire you. So there's a huge leg up from that perspective. And there's an obvious benefit of if you are in depth in this organization, then you can work with the other students there. And if they go on to land an opportunity at Google or Microsoft or whatever company that you want to work for, you now have an in, you have a connection who can refer you. And that's a huge leg up. So I think there's a ton of value from that perspective. I think from the, like what you do at the organization, maybe I'm a little bit pessimistic or jaded, but my experience like at Stanford is that a lot of the things where I spent my time on, like, I don't know, like a good example would be I put on a couple events. Like I put on like a monthly event for IEEE, which is like the electronics and computer science organization at Stanford.
Okay.
And to be totally honest, I don't know the ROI. Like, I don't know if the ROI on those was that good. Like, I feel like I put in a ton of time, but I'm not sure if I really learned that much, especially not in a technical perspective. I didn't learn that much in terms of coding or software engineering. It was more about like event management. But I do think it was definitely worthwhile from the perspective of getting to know really smart people.
Oh, okay, because that's the similar thing. Because like me, I'm a part of an e-board, and that's like an executive position for the student organization, and like that's where one of our responsibilities to host events for students. So I just wanted to see, like, especially if I'm interested in being like a CTO or a director of technology, which is more like leadership and management type of thing, those are the same type of thing or the same type of skills you would need. And I want to know, would you recommend that is something that you put on your resume?
Yeah, so I think 100% you should put on your resume.
Okay.
I think that it definitely showcases that you have a passion or an interest in that.
Okay.
I think two things that come to mind. You mentioned e-board, and I think so. Like the name implies that it's some sort of virtual board.
Yeah, executive board. Yeah.
Oh, executive. Okay, sorry. I thought it meant like e-board as in like virtual board. But okay, executive board. That's great. One thing just I'll make sure is like the big value for me was networking, getting to know other people, and it kind of sucks that like COVID has happened. And I feel like a lot of those in-person connections where you really foster that connection, I think those are much harder to do online. So I think one thing that you should just keep in mind, Rakim, is like make sure that you are able to really solidify those connections. And that is really, I think, what will help you. The second thing I want to mention is that you brought up this point about you want to eventually become like a director or CTO. That's amazing. I think you should go for it. But the thing I will caution against is that in order to get to that position, in my experience at the companies that I've looked at and I've worked at, the way you get there is by being very, very technically sound. So you don't get to become a CTO or director by like having an amazing event management and like a amazing ability to give speeches, although that will certainly help and you need that. But I think what will actually be even more important is you need to have that along with the ability to ship production code and be able to talk about software and be able to give feedback on software. So I'm not sure if there's a capability for you to do that at your company, but that's kind of how I would think about it. Thanks for the question. All right. Priya Darshan, I think.
Hi, thank you very much for the session first.
So my question is that there are certain roles like right now I'm a support engineer where I produce bug fixes for the application. So where how do we represent these in the CV? Because when we go for the minor detail, like for a week we make couple of fixes. So giving those details is useless. But if we say that we made countless fixes to the production, then it doesn't reflect that what we have done. So like if I take another example, that if we tune a performance tune an application, so we do many things, 100 things to get it to the production level, but stating everything is make the CV the resume length and not mentioning them and saying that we make the application ready would not reflect what we have done. How we are going to reflect this in the resume?
Yeah, good question. So like just to recap the question is, it seems like you're coming from a background of like kind of a fixer archetype where you like fix issues as opposed to like building new features, which is of course still very valuable. And how do you capture that impact on the CV? I think bug fixing more or less follows a lot of the same rules as product development, because like you fix a bug to have an impact, essentially it's versus like creating a positive impact directly, creating versus like via creating a new fancy feature, you're essentially removing a negative, which is net positive, right? So like a bunch of users are going through some bad experience because of this bug, and then you remove it by fixing that bug. So you can essentially apply a lot of the same rules. Like let's say there's like some bug that makes the onboarding flow, like it crashes, like 20% of the time. If you fix that bug, then you're going to increase the amount of people who survive through the onboarding flow and actually make an account by 20%, right? So you can essentially still put that delta. And kind of going back to the point of like, how do we put down everything you've done? Again, like the point of the resume is not to put down everything you've done. It's essentially to cherry pick the best things you've done and then, show the impact behind those accomplishments. So, they actually appear meaningful to the recruiter. And then essentially having this super concentrated kind of like sheet of like, amazingness and impressive statements, all together. So that's kind of like my advice there. Like if I wrote down everything I did, especially at Facebook, because Facebook moves so fast, my resume would be a book, but wouldn't be very high signal. So yeah, like I'm sure like if you're fixing a lot of bugs, and companies usually have a way of understanding like which bug is being hit by the most users, then yeah, you will have some bugs that probably affect like a lot of users, thousands, maybe millions of users. And then when you fix it, then yeah, you can essentially claim that impact on your resume.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we can do like one more question.
Yeah, let's do
Yeah.
Paulina's question, and then I think we'll end it at this point because it's like 3 hours. It's pretty amazing that we still have all of you here. But thanks for joining. But yeah, we'll do Paulina, and then anyone who we didn't get to, I'm really sorry, but just please join us on Slack and message us, and we'll help you out. All right, Paulina, go for it.
Yeah, guys, I was just about to say how impressed I am with the amount of energy you have to answer all of our questions. I have a question that I just graduated from the bootcamp, and I have an option to collaborate on my portfolio piece with another student or work completely on my own. Based on your opinion, what is preferable for the CV?
Ooh, I like that. So I think that the answer will depend on your level of confidence to build and ship something on your own. If you feel like you have that capability and you will be able to get yourself unstuck, and that's like a pretty hard thing to do, especially if you're very new to software. But if you feel like you have that capability, then I think you should try and make a go for it on your own. And at least for Alex and I, like I've loved working with Alex, and it's been amazing for the past like 9 or 10 months to work with him. But like prior to that, I think both Alex and I, we've at least Alex, he's been working primarily on his own, and that just allows you to learn a lot because like you're the person responsible for everything. Design, bug fixing, deployment, everything. So I think there's a ton of learning that happens. But of course, if you feel like you're not at that point where you can really own the whole thing, then I think having that social accountability and pairing up with someone is 100% valuable. And in terms of how that manifests in a resume or a CV, then I feel like you can still, of course, put your project, your personal project on your resume, even if it's shared between 2 or 3 people. But just be really clear about what you did versus what other people did, because you don't want to dilute your impact and say, I built this app with 3 people. Because I want you, the way you should phrase it instead is I built the onboarding flow of this app, which led to X number of signups. So I feel like that's like the way you phrase it becomes a little bit more nuanced and tricky if you have a group project. But I think either works depending on your level of confidence.
Amazing answer. Thank you. I'll use that advice.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so with that, it's fun to see all the cities that people are in: Windsor, Canada, Atlanta, Ghana. That's amazing. Nigeria, India, of course. I love that. Paulino is in Barcelona. Cool. Okay, so I think our tradition is normally we're going to open up the audio just for people to say hello or goodbye. Before I do that, Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, as mentioned before, time is the most valuable resource. So yeah, thank you so much, especially to everyone here for choosing to invest so much of your time with us. If you've been here since the beginning, that means you've been with us for 3 hours, which is a ridiculous amount of time. The fact that there's like around 100 people who chose to stick with us for 3 hours is absolutely crazy. So yeah, thank you all so much. And yeah, as usual, like, yeah, we would love to connect on LinkedIn and answer your messages on Slack, and, you know, hold future sessions that you guys come to. We're in this for the long haul. Like, yeah, we give a lot of kind of short-term tactical stuff like this on how to pass your interview, how to have a nice resume, but the vision for this community is to support you on your entire tech journey. Like, we want to be with you to optimize your resume, when you start getting job opportunities, when you start passing interviews, when you get the offer, when you start as a junior engineer, when you're looking for promotion, maybe even when you're trying to get to a tech lead or engineering manager level. We want to be with you every step of the way. And I truly believe that the depth of experience that Rahul and I have, a lot of which at top tech companies like Facebook, we can do that. And we want to do that. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here with us. And of course, I think the most simple way to help is just, you know, let people know that we're giving all this away for free. The more the merrier, in my opinion. Yeah, like share the events Microsoft is attending, like our posts, @mention us. We pretty much read every post we're @mentioned in, do all those good things. Let's get this high quality free content to go viral as much as we can.
Let's do it. And then action items are, I'll share my college resume just in case that's helpful for people. And then Alex has a couple Medium articles that I think you've written that I think will be super helpful. So Alex and I will share those. Action item for all of you: if you have a personal project that would be interesting and you want feedback, detailed feedback from me or Alex, then please do go to emberapp.com or download one of the mobile apps. And you can upload the information there. But yeah, 3 hours in. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. You should be able to unmute yourself. But I turned on my camera, by the way. Hello, everyone. But you should be able to unmute yourself, and I'll see all of you later.
Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you, Alex and Rahul.
Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Make sure to get some rest, guys, and get some lunch in you guys. Thank you guys so much for the Ember app and the session.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm going to grab lunch right now with my brother. I'm excited.
Bye.
Alex.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Rahul,
I'm crying.
Why are you leaving? Looking forward to the next one.
All right, Alex, hopefully you have some time for lunch now. I will end the call now, but all right, see y'all later. Bye,
I'm
everyone.
getting tired. Yeah, see you all later. Thanks so much again. All right, I'm gonna leave the meeting now.
Thank you, Alex.
I'm not leaving.